Chapter 2688, Legacy Land's True Purpose. As soon as Shifeng activated the Legacy Scroll, darkness enveloped his vision once more, and the world seemed to spin around him. Everything was just like how he first walked into the dark vortex in the core room. The Legacy Scroll was a treasure highly sought after by the various superpowers, something they were willing to trade even fragmented legendary items for. And it was so coveted because it allowed players to re-challenge the same Legacy Land. While this function might not seem like much, it was heaven sent for players challenging their Tier 4 promotion quest. Normally, players had only one opportunity to challenge a Legacy Land. So long as they died, they would be teleported out of the Legacy Land, and the portal to the Legacy Land would disappear and reappear in another random location. Even if players found another Legacy Land portal later on, the chances of that portal leading to the same Legacy Land were abysmally low. Hence, it was almost impossible to challenge the same Legacy Land twice, which, in turn, made it impossible to learn from experience. For players, the difference between having a lot of experience when challenging a Legacy Land and challenging it cold was massive. Their chances of successfully clearing their Tier 4 promotion quest would skyrocket if they had foreknowledge of their Legacy Land. Hence, the various superpowers in the past had been willing to go as far as exchanging fragmented legendary items for Legacy Scrolls. In the eyes of ordinary players, this transaction would seem somewhat stupid. In reality, however, the difference between Tier 3 and Tier 4 was like the difference between life in the mud and in the clouds. Moreover, as players reached higher levels, the disparity in strength would only widen. After all, the opportunities Tier 3 and Tier 4 players could encounter and secure during the later stages of the game were completely different. Moreover, there was the difference in the amount of basic attributes Tier 3 and Tier 4 players gained whenever they leveled up. Meanwhile, after a short moment in the darkness, Shifeng reappeared in the sky above his first Legacy Land. And like before, his body started free-falling toward the bottomless abyss below him. Moreover, the cooldown of all of his skills and spells had been refreshed, the current situation making it seem as if he had gone back in time. Good. A quick check found that even the additional skills of his weapons and equipment had been refreshed. He immediately activated Gale Domain and flew straight to the nearest cliff. Previously, he had wasted a lot of time observing the Legacy Land. As a result, by the time he activated Gale Domain, the gravitational force acting on his body had already increased considerably, which had, in turn, reduced his speed and maneuverability by a significant margin. This time, though, as he had activated Gale Domain almost as soon as he arrived in the Legacy Land, he was able to fly at nearly double the speed he had before. In the end, he managed to reach the nearest cliff in just 15 seconds, with a lot of flight time remaining. Break! After arriving before the cliff, Shifeng immediately executed Light Shadow at it. Boom! An explosion rang out as rubble went flying. However, to Shifeng's surprise, the Phantom Greatsword had only managed to carve out a single tear the size of a human adult, barely enough for one person to stand in. Light Shadow's power was actually reduced this much? Shifeng frowned at the tear in the cliff. The power of Light Shadow was much weaker than he expected. He had given his all in that attack, yet it had barely reached the intermediate rank Tier 4 standard. Had he used such an attack against the infant Black Dragon's Dragon Breath, he definitely would have ended up dead. However, Shifeng did not dare to waste time. Quickly, he executed Light Shadow against the cliff once more. By the 8th time he executed Light Shadow, Gale Domain finally expired. Fortunately, he had managed to carve out an adequate foothold for himself. With this foothold, he should have enough space to dodge and block the infant Black Dragon's attacks. However, when Shifeng gazed down at the bottomless abyss, he could not help massaging his temple. Although his current situation was much better than before, he still had massive problems to deal with. Setting aside the 3 infant dragons, just the fact that he needed to carve a path down the cliff was already a huge problem. Each use of Light Shadow only allowed him to carve out a small hole fit for one person to stand in. The hole was also only 1 meter deep. However, by his estimates, he needed to descend several kilometers to reach the area where he had seen the legacy fragments. In that case, he wouldn't be able to reach the legacy fragments even after executing Light Shadow for a month. Although he could increase the destructive power of his attacks by using berserk skills were meant to save his life. They should not be used unless absolutely necessary, especially in this godforsaken legacy land. There were simply too many unknown dangers here. If he used up his berserk skills too quickly, he would definitely die when a truly dangerous situation popped up. It seems I have to find a way to increase the power of my attacks. After giving the matter some thought, Feng concluded that this was his only option. Using summoning tools was impossible while inside a legacy land. Players weren't allowed to summon their personal guards here. In such a situation, the only way he could reach the legacy fragments as quickly as possible was to raise the raw power of his attacks. However, such a feat was easier said than done. The mana technique Light Shadow was currently the strongest move in his repertoire. Even bronze combat techniques could not hold a candle to it. However, if he simply relied on Light Shadow to carve a path down, he wouldn't reach the legacy fragments even if he tired himself to death. He needed a qualitative improvement to his raw power. If I wish to increase the power of my attacks, aside from breaking through the limits of my mana body, the only other option is to improve my mana technique. Without any inspirations, trying to break through the mana body's perfect state is utterly impossible. In that case, I have no choice but to try to master the second sword, Holy Devour. As Feng sensed the mana surrounding him, an idea struck him. Although the environment here is extremely harsh and the density of the mana here is close to zero, my brain doesn't feel any discomfort. The environment here is roughly similar to that inside the Legacy Gate. Could the environment here be created for the purpose of helping players learn mana techniques? Having thought up to this point, Feng felt that there was a high possibility of his guess being correct. Legacy lands were termed as such because they provided guidance to their challengers. They weren't created to extinguish all life. Meanwhile, in low mana environments, players would have an easier time not only sensing the mana flowing within their mana bodies but also training in mana techniques. This was because the ability to control one's mana played an important role in executing a mana technique. And in a low mana environment, players wouldn't have to deal with as much interference from the ambient mana as they normally would, which, in turn, allowed them to perceive and control their mana better. Moreover, it was important for players seeking to get promoted to Tier 4 to possess an adequate degree of mana control, aside from fully unlocking their mana bodies. After all, the birth of a mana domain relied heavily on a player's ability to control mana. Feng unsheathed the Abyssal Blade and started trying to execute the second sword, Holy Devour. The most important point to take note of when executing Light Shadow was the shaping of mana. The complexity of the technique involved in doing so could inspire despair even in peak experts. Only domain realm experts that had developed their mana control to a certain extent could execute Light Shadow. Holy Devour, on the other hand, required its user to materialize mana. Without sufficient understanding of the operating principle and structure of mana, executing Holy Devour would be utterly impossible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Previously, Feng had not held much hope of learning how to execute Holy Devour while he was still at Tier 3. After all, the degree of perception and control of mana required to execute the technique reached inhuman levels. However, due to the faux Saint Devourer's soul marks, his perception of mana had undergone a qualitative transformation. In the next moment, Feng shut his eyes and lightly raised the Abyssal Blade with both hands. He then manipulated his mana domain to start gathering as much mana as possible around the Abyssal Blade. After draining all the ambient mana, Feng abruptly opened his eyes and swung the Abyssal Blade at the cliff wall before him. Holy Devour. Chapter 2689, simplified Holy Devour. As Feng swung down the Abyssal Blade, a bundle of blazing red flames enveloped the magic weapon, causing even the surrounding space to tremble. In the next moment, the blazing red flames devoured the cliff wall before him. Boom! Along with the sound of an explosion, countless stone fragments went flying. Originally, the cave Feng had dug for himself was only the size of a small room. Now, however, the cave had grown to the size of a small house. Moreover, its walls were extremely smooth as if they had been polished. So strong. Surprise flashed in Shifeng's eyes as he took in the cave before him. He had only been trying to execute Holy Devour. He never thought that he would actually succeed on the first attempt. Although the second sword he executed was many times weaker than the Heavenly Blue Saints version and could even be considered incomplete, the power of his attack was already close to the upper rank Tier 4 standard. With such destructive power, his efficiency in carving out a path to the legacy fragments should improve by several dozen times. However, just as Shifeng thought of using Holy Devour once more, his consciousness suddenly wavered, and a stinging pain assaulted his brain. Sure enough, it is still too much for my current self to execute Holy Devour. Shifeng could not help a bitter smile at this situation. He had indeed succeeded in executing Holy Devour. However, the amount of concentration he had consumed by using it once was equivalent to executing over a dozen bronze combat techniques simultaneously. With such a high consumption rate, he would run out of concentration after using Holy Devour 3 or 4 more times. Moreover, he was able to achieve such a result only because his concentration had reached the Tier 4 standard already. Had his concentration remained at the Tier 3 standard, he would have most likely passed out as soon as he executed the first Holy Devour. However, just as Shifeng was thinking of how he could further perfect his Holy Devour to reduce the burden on his concentration, a tremor suddenly rocked the cave. Before he could react to this unexpected development, the rubble scattered around the cave suddenly gathered and formed a humanoid golem that was as tall as he was. The moment the golem took shape, it released a frightening pulse of mana that froze the ambient mana, making it impossible for him to manipulate the ambient mana at all. Outer Path Guardian. Non-elemental creature, Grand Lord, level 121 HP 53, 500, 000/53, 500, 000. A non-elemental creature? Shifeng was a little surprised when he saw the Outer Path Guardian. He'd never heard of the non-elemental creature label before. Normally, if a monster wasn't an elemental creature, they would be labeled with their race, such as giant, elf, wild creature, orc, and so on. Before Shifeng could properly digest this situation, the Outer Path Guardian suddenly appeared before him. Its 2 arms then transformed into razor-sharp rock blades that cut at him, the attack speed it displayed surpassing that of ordinary Grand Lords and nearly rivaling mythic monsters. However, Shifeng was no pushover either. With his extraordinary combat standard and basic attributes, even mythic monsters of the same level would have difficulty landing attacks on him, let alone a Grand Lord whose speed was merely close to rivaling mythic monsters. In the next moment, Shifeng brandished the abyssal blade. Sword's transmigration. In the blink of an eye, Shifeng deflected over a dozen attacks. Immediately afterward, he sent a counterattack cutting at the Path Guardian. In the next moment, a pitch-black sword light cut at the Path Guardian's body. A metallic clang echoed in the cave as the sword light came into contact with the Path Guardian. However, to Shifeng's surprise, not only did his attack fail to injure the Path Guardian, but the impact even made himself stumble half a step back. The abyssal blade he wielded also vibrated violently as if it had just struck on an impenetrable wall. What kind of monster is this? Shifeng stared at the Outer Path Guardian in astonishment. The abyssal blade was capable of cutting through even the skin of superior mythics, yet not only did the magic weapon fail to scratch the Outer Path Guardian's body, but the Grand Lord didn't even lose a single HP from the attack. The Guardian's defense was simply heaven-defying. Regardless of Shifeng's surprise, the Path Guardian did not stop its actions, launching attacks at him one after another. Even after fighting for several minutes consecutively, the Path Guardian showed no signs of weakening or slowing down at all. It was like a tireless machine. Although Shifeng had landed over 100 attacks on the Path Guardian, he had failed to cause any damage whatsoever to the Grand Lord. Even Light Shadow was useless against it. Is it invulnerable? Shifeng's head ached as he continuously deflected the Path Guardian's attacks. Previously, he had seen hope of obtaining the legacy fragments. He never imagined that a monster like the Outer Path Guardian would appear after he destroyed the cliff wall. Despite the Path Guardian having only a little over 50 million HP, which was very low for a level 121 Grand Lord, he actually failed to make a dent. At this rate, he would collapse from exhaustion before he could even secure the legacy fragments. Time passed quickly. Before Shifeng realized it, over a dozen minutes had elapsed already. However, despite having attacked every possible weak point he could find on the Outer Path Guardian, he still hadn't damaged the Grand Lord. To make matters worse, the frozen ambient mana meant that he experienced none of the recovery effects he would normally experience when surrounded by mana. He would collapse from exhaustion after another hour of fighting at this rate. Screw it. Shifeng gritted his teeth and gripped the abyssal blade with both hands before executing Holy Devour against the Outer Path Guardian. If even this is no good, I'll have no choice but to use Berserk skills. Holy Devour was currently the strongest move he could execute without transforming into a Black Dragon King. If even Holy Devour was incapable of harming the Path Guardian, he would have to use a Berserk skill to boost his strength further, something he wished to avoid doing if possible. Immediately, a scorching inferno engulfed the Outer Path Guardian. Boom! In the next moment, the Path Guardian's body shot out of the blazing inferno like a cannonball and smashed into the back of the cave. Cracks formed on the Path Guardian's originally invulnerable body, and the Grand Lord's HP also fell by over 3.7 million. It was effective? Shifeng was surprised as he looked at the Path Guardian lying on the ground. Previously, even Light Shadow failed to damage the Outer Path Guardian. However, not only did Holy Devour succeed in damaging the Path Guardian, but its effects even far exceeded his initial expectations. Did I break through its defensive limit? Shifeng wondered. However, he quickly shook his head and denied the thought. No, that's not right. Even if my attack exceeded the Guardian's defensive limit, it shouldn't have produced such overwhelming results. He had plenty of experience in surpassing a monster's defensive limit. Hence, he knew that exceeding a monster's defensive limit wouldn't allow him to suddenly go from dealing 0 damage to dealing over 3.7 million damage. Moreover, normally, even if one failed to exceed a monster's defensive limit, the monster should still receive some form of damage after receiving an attack. A non-elemental creature, a mana screen, and Holy Devour? Shifeng continuously racked his mind as he watched the Outer Path Guardian slowly standing back up. Although he had successfully damaged the Path Guardian already, in his current state, he could execute Holy Devour only 1 or 2 more times. Hence, his situation remained dire. It was necessary for him to identify the reason why he had succeeded in damaging the Path Guardian. Otherwise, even if he activated his Berserk skill, he would only end up wasting it. Following which, Shifeng arrived before the Path Guardian and executed Light Shadow against it. However, just like the last time he had used the mana technique, he failed to inflict any damage on the Grand Lord. Since Light Shadow is ineffective against it, I'll have to use another method. Seeing the Path Guardian slashing its 2 blade hands at him once more, Shifeng sidestepped, then slipped behind the Guardian. He concentrated his mana within the abyssal blade as if he were executing Holy Devour, but did not let any of the mana escape the magic weapon. Consequently, instead of a blazing inferno, only a small layer of flames appeared around the abyssal blade as he sent the magic weapon slashing down at the Path Guardian's back. In the next moment, the abyssal blade actually cut into the Path Guardian's sturdy body, inflicting over 1.6 million damage on the Grand Lord. Sure enough, Shifeng's eyes glowed with excitement at the success of his attack. After seeing that Holy Devour was highly effective against the Path Guardian while Light Shadow was completely ineffective, it was clear to Shifeng that the Path Guardian's defensive limit had nothing to do with why one could deal damage to it while the other couldn't. Instead, the reason for this situation lay in the difference between the two techniques, the method of utilizing mana. Light Shadow was a technique that gave shape to mana, whereas Holy Devour was a technique that caused mana to go berserk before materializing it to exhibit a frighteningly destructive power that could destroy even the very essence of matter. Currently, although he did not fully execute Holy Devour, he had materialized his mana and concentrated it on the abyssal blade. By doing so, he was able to drastically reduce his consumption of mana and concentration while still utilizing the effects of materialized mana. Only, the raw power and scale of his attack were considerably smaller compared to those of the real Holy Devour. Basically, he had executed a simplified version of Holy Devour. Meanwhile, after achieving success once, Shi Feng promptly started bombarding the Path Guardian with attacks. In terms of combat power, the Outer Path Guardian was significantly inferior to ordinary mythic monsters. The only thing that made it a challenging foe was the fact that it could be damaged only after certain conditions were met. However, now that Shi Feng had met these conditions, the Path Guardian's 53.5 million HP was nothing. In less than 2 minutes, Shi Feng had depleted all of the Outer Path Guardian's HP. The Guardian's rocky body then crumbled and scattered on the ground. Meanwhile, along with the Outer Path Guardian's death, not only did Shi Feng's experience bar fill up by a significant margin, but a stream of black mist also flowed into his heart. In the next moment, fragmented images appeared before him one after another. At the same time, a system notification also entered his ears. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. System, you have obtained 5 legacy power points. Tier 4 legacy completion rate at 0.5%. When legacy completion rate reaches 85%, you may attempt to activate your Tier 4 legacy. Legacy power? Shi Feng was surprised to see the system notification. He never thought that killing the Outer Path Guardian would actually grant him legacy power. Collecting legacy power using this method would be much easier than trying to descend into the abyss and reach the legacy fragments. Meanwhile, shortly after the Outer Path Guardian died, its body exploded into bundles of light that hovered quietly in midair, expelling all the mana in the surrounding space. Chapter 2690 Unknown Metal Fragments. What a powerful phenomenon! Shi Feng's heart was filled with surprise when he saw the dozen or so items quietly hovering in midair. He had seen many kinds of monster loot before. He had even seen loot accompanied by a holy chant. However, this was the first time he had seen or heard of the phenomenon the Outer Path Guardian's loot created. Currently, all mana within a 50-yard radius of the dropped items was getting banished from the area. Even the mana within his body was rapidly depleting. Right now, if a player with a silver mana body were standing here, they would most likely have lost consciousness instantly from mana exhaustion. Seeing this situation, Shi Feng did not dare hesitate for too long. Immediately, he stepped forward and tried to store the loot in his bag space. However, the instant he touched one of the dropped items, a system notification entered his ears. System, this item should not be stored, as it has an extremely powerful repulsion toward mana. Storing it in your epic spatial bag involves a certain degree of danger. Do you wish to store this item in your epic spatial bag? Should not be stored? Shi Feng was quite surprised at the system notification. However, despite his surprise, he still chose to store the loot in his epic spatial bag. After all, he would lose his life if he didn't put the items into his bag space and allowed the mana repulsion field to continue existing. As he stored the items in his bag one after another, the mana environment within the cave gradually recovered. Upon seeing this, he could not help a sigh of relief. How close! These items truly are strange. Had I been a few seconds later in taking action, they probably would have drained all my mana. Sitting down, Shi Feng shuddered involuntarily as he checked the 15 new items inside his bag space. Previously, the Outer Path Guardian was already plenty astonishing, as it could actually freeze the mana around it, preventing players from using the ambient mana. For players that relied heavily on skills and spells during combat, this was a fatal ability. However, these dropped items were even more amazing. They had directly banished all the mana within a 50-yard radius. Not even the mana within his body was exempt. This situation was simply unheard of. If players encountered these extraordinary items without any means to store the items, they would definitely meet their deaths. Despite Shi Feng's wariness toward these items, he could not hold back his curiosity and started inspecting them. After he used his identification skill on these items, he was stunned. He couldn't appraise any of these 15 metal fragments. Even after he activated Omniscient Eyes, all he got was that these metal fragments were named as Unknown Metal Fragment, and that they were originally part of a weapon. What kind of weapon was it? Isn't it a little too amazing? Just its fragments alone are so powerful already. Even legendary weapons are not that powerful. Shi Feng was astonished when he saw the little information omniscient eyes obtained. In God's domain, legendary items usually deteriorated into fragmented legendary items because their core component had suffered damage, which prevented them from exhibiting their true might. However, if a legendary weapon got shattered into numerous fragments, rather than becoming multiple fragmented legendary weapons, the legendary weapon would become garbage. Only if the shards were recast and more material was added was there a chance of them becoming a fragmented legendary weapon. Yet, despite not having undergone any rework, the fragments in his bag still exhibited such a powerful mana repulsion effect. Even the strongest legendary weapons he had heard of were unlikely to be so powerful. However, Shi Feng did not dwell on the metal fragments. After getting enough rest, he left them sitting inside his bag space and resumed attacking the cliff wall. Since he now knew that the Outer Path Guardians provided legacy power and that the Guardians spawned from the rubble of the cliff, he naturally wouldn't let this opportunity to kill two birds with one stone get away. However, despite Shi Feng repeatedly using Holy Devour on the cliff wall, not every attack of his caused an Outer Path Guardian to spawn. Roughly one Guardian spawned for every 3 or 4 attacks he executed. As a result, his accumulation of legacy power wasn't going as fast as he initially expected. Moreover, because of the legacy land's harsh environment, which severely hampered stamina and concentration recovery, Shi Feng's recovery rate wasn't particularly fast despite the high-ranking foods and beverages he consumed. At best, it was like he was resting inside an ordinary town. Fortunately, he was familiar with the harsh environments of Tier 4 legacy lands and had made preparations beforehand. Long before he could challenge his Tier 4 promotion quest, he had already tasked Melancholic Smile with stockpiling a large amount of high-ranking foods and beverages in the guild's warehouse for both himself and the rest of the guild's core upper echelon. Hence, he currently had more than enough high-ranking foods and beverages to last him for 2 whole months. As Shi Feng relentlessly attacked the cliff and killed Outer Path Guardians, his experience bar filled up rapidly. His mastery over the simplified Holy Devour also improved. Only, as the number of Outer Path Guardians he killed increased, the number of unknown metal fragments he obtained conversely decreased. Initially, each kill yielded him more than 10 fragments. Eventually, that number dropped to single digits. Now, he got just 1 or 2 from every kill. As Shi Feng progressed down the cliff, he had unknowingly spent 9 days inside the legacy land. After 9 days of constant grinding, Shi Feng had reached level 124. If not for Demon God Atlok's soul curse, he would have already reached the level 125 threshold. As for the accumulation of legacy power, he had reached 83% completion rate already, just 2% away from the minimum requirement to activate his Tier 4 legacy. As for the unknown metal fragments, he had collected a total of 96. Meanwhile, a lot had also happened in the outside world during these 9 days. Thanks to the 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids Mushin provided as a deposit, Shi Feng could afford to consume 1 bottle per day, meeting the energy requirements of his brain. His body's condition also improved considerably. However, if he wished to recover to his peak state, he still needed life potions. Aside from that, Zero Wing's main force members also started exiting the spatial maze one after another. However, as Fire Dance, Aqua Rose, Gentle Snow, and 24 or so other players had taken different paths midway through the maze, they remained trapped inside. Along with the return of the majority of Zero Wing's main force, the prosperous Zero Wing flourished even more. After returning to the eastern continent, Zero Wing's main force members continuously raided large-scale and super-large-scale team dungeons, enriching the guild warehouse with plenty of rare materials. Including the rare materials brought back from the western continent, Melancholic Smile and the others produced batch after batch of level 120 weapons and equipment. Now, when it came to level 120 weapons and equipment, Zero Wing surpassed the various superpowers. For a time, Zero Wing entered the spotlight of the neighboring kingdoms and empires, and many expert players and well-known adventurer teams applied to join Zero Wing. However, during all of this, a very shocking matter got exposed. The true identity of Zero Wing's mysterious guild leader, Black Flame. When this information spread, it shocked the Eastern continent's various powers. This was especially true for Unyielding Soul, Crimson Emperor, and the Secret Pavilion, superpowers that were partners of Zero Wing. None of them had ever thought that Zero Wing was truly a guild that had no background whatsoever and that a youth like Shi Feng had developed it from scratch. God's Domain's various powers no longer feared Zero Wing. Many powers started secretly targeting Zero Wing's internal members. At the same time, they spent huge sums to snatch the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's disciples and customers of Zero Wing's virtual combat platforms. They even offered astronomical prices to poach Zero Wing's core members, resulting in a brain drain of Zero Wing's internal members and core members day after day. Guild Leader, another dozen core members have applied for withdrawal today. In addition, quite a few training centers and dojos disciples have come challenging our training center's disciples, and several of our disciples got injured. Even Master Lei Bao himself got challenged by a mysterious half-step grandmaster martial artist on his way home and ended up suffering heavy injuries. That mysterious expert warned Master Lei Bao that if he remained in Zero Wing, there would be more of such incidents. Moreover, several superpowers have sent representatives to our headquarters. They say that so long as we let them become shareholders of Zero Wing, they'll make all these problems go away, Liang Jing reported in frustration. However, these still aren't the most crucial matters. The biggest problem is that the suppliers that previously provided us with S-rank nutrient fluids and state-of-the-art training facilities now refuse to do business with us. Moreover, nobody is commissioning our guild for tasks anymore. At this rate, we can only rely on exchanging coins for credits to maintain our guild's daily operations. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I understand. For now, make use of Silverwing City's income to fill in the gaps, Shi Feng said, nodding. Also, did you find out which superpower sent that expert that injured Lei Bao? I checked with the Secret Pavilion. Although the other party hid themselves quite thoroughly, the Secret Pavilion still managed to find out who sent that expert. It's Dragonheart Island's War Blood adventurer team, Liang Jing said. War Blood? In an icy tone, Shi Feng said, it seems these superpowers really think Zero Wing is some kind of pushover. Do they honestly believe I can't do anything against them? Guild Leader, we don't have the home ground advantage on Dragonheart Island. Moreover, Starlink and a few other superpowers have partnered with Warblood. They also have a medium fortress. Right now, our forces are tied up defending Silverwing City and Stone Forest City. If we dispatch a large number of experts to Dragonheart Island, I'm afraid. When Liang Jing heard Shi Feng's words, she hurriedly tried to dissuade him from taking any rash actions. I know. I'll handle this matter myself, Shi Feng said calmly before hopping back into his virtual gaming cabin and logging into God's Domain. Chapter 2691. Breaking through the limit. The gravitational force here is almost the same as what I felt when those infant black dragons appeared. If I continue digging downward, those dragons will most likely notice my presence. After killing another Outer Path Guardian, Shi Feng poked his head out of the platform he had carved for himself to look at the bottomless abyss. After 9 days of arduous effort, he had finally reached the altitude where he first came into contact with the infant black dragons. Although the infant black dragons were only Tier 3 Great Lords, they were existences that no individual Tier 3 player could hope to go up against. Not to mention, there were 3 infant black dragons moving together here. Currently, the best way for him to complete his Tier 4 promotion was through killing more Outer Path Guardians and steadily accumulating his legacy power to 85% completion rate. Then he could activate his Tier 4 legacy. However, as he carved his way down the cliff, the frequency of the Outer Path Guardian's appearance decreased. In fact, the Guardian he had just killed took him nearly an hour to spawn. At this rate, he would most likely enter the 3 infant black dragons' perception range by the time he could spawn the next Outer Path Guardian. In that case, he would have to fight the Outer Path Guardian while simultaneously dealing with the 3 dragons' attacks. Sure enough, the main god system won't let players enjoy such an easy promotion. In the end, I still have to obtain one of those legacy fragments. Shi Feng could not help a sigh as he looked at his legacy power points. With his current standards, so long as he activated a berserk skill, swiftly killing an Outer Path Guardian while dealing with the attacks of the 3 infant black dragons should be possible. However, he was still short of 3 guardian kills to reach the minimum 85% completion rate. Even though he had multiple berserk skills, the likelihood of him being able to spawn and kill 3 Outer Path Guardians during the limited duration of his berserk skills was extremely low. After all, the last Outer Path Guardian had taken him nearly an hour to spawn. At best, he would be able to kill 1 guardian after getting discovered by the infant dragons. As for the remaining 2 Outer Path Guardians, he could forget about them because no matter how he looked at it, coping with the infant dragon's attacks for 2 or 3 hours while he continued carving the cliff was simply impossible. This left him with only one option to complete his promotion quest, obtaining a legacy fragment. While legacy fragments didn't carry equal amounts of legacy power, each contained at least 10 points to as much as 40 points. With his current legacy power points, he needed only 1 legacy fragment to meet the minimum requirement to activate his Tier 4 legacy. Although the completion rate of one's Tier 4 legacy would somewhat influence the success rate of the Tier 4 promotion quest, it wasn't absolute. Legacy power only allowed players to activate their Tier 4 legacy. The more legacy power players managed to collect, the larger the portion of their Tier 4 legacy they could activate. However, after activating and unraveling the secrets of their Tier 4 legacy, players needed to learn the unraveled knowledge in order to complete their Tier 4 promotion quest. Clearing this portion of their promotion quest depended entirely on their own capabilities. The amount of legacy power they accumulated before had no bearing on this part of the quest. And if players failed to learn an adequate amount of knowledge from their legacy within the stipulated time, they would still fail their Tier 4 promotion quest. In the past, the main reason why most Tier 3 experts failed to reach Tier 4 was precisely this second portion, not the failure to acquire a sufficient amount of legacy power. This was also the reason why the stronger a legacy was, the more difficult the Tier 4 promotion quest would be. The stronger a legacy was, the more complex the information contained within it. For example, legacies belonging to the giant and elven race contained incredibly abstruse information. Hence, those playing as giants and elves faced much greater difficulty when challenging their promotion quests. Even if players geared themselves in powerful weapons and equipment, these items would just allow them to obtain more legacy power and open up more knowledge for them to learn. Players still had to rely on their own learning capabilities to complete their Tier 4 promotion quest. Hence, Shi Feng could activate his legacy at 85% completion rate. Reaching 100% wasn't necessary for the completion of his promotion quest. However, trying to reach and obtain the legacy fragments below wouldn't be easy. After all, he had to go up against 3 infant black dragons in the process. There was only so much he could do within the limited duration of his berserk skills. The part where he obtained the legacy fragments would be especially challenging. If a player that did not know how legacy fragments worked were in his shoes right now, they would most likely lose their lives during this process. Players would not automatically obtain the legacy power contained within a legacy fragment. Instead, after securing the fragment, they usually spent between 10 to 20 minutes absorbing the legacy power. And although players did not need direct contact with a legacy fragment to absorb its legacy power, if they went too far away from the fragment, the process would get interrupted and the fragment would shatter. Due to these reasons, players generally needed to complete the process in a safe environment. With the 3 infant dragons harassing Shi Feng, he obviously wouldn't be able to absorb a legacy fragment in safety. He would have to do it while fighting. However, with the berserk skills he had, he simply wouldn't be able to last that long. No, it's not exactly impossible. If I can hold on for some time in my normal state, it might be possible to secure a legacy fragment. After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng decided to take the risk and try to secure a legacy fragment. After all, he was no longer the same as when he first entered the Legacy Land. Not only was he able to execute Holy Devour now, but he had even mastered a simplified version of Holy Devour. Although this simplified Holy Devour was not as powerful as the real deal, the raw power it contained was still superior to that of Light Shadow. With this simplified Holy Devour, he might be able to hold his own against the infant black dragons. After taking a deep breath, he took out the Ring of Gospel from his bag and activated Miniature World and Ring of Brilliance. Now that he had gotten this far in his promotion quest, and he had to go up against the 3 infant dragons no matter what, he no longer had any reason to hold back his cards. Upon Ring of Brilliance's activation, the density of the ambient mana gradually increased. As for Shi Feng himself, his basic attributes rose by 5%. Although Ring of Brilliance's effects were significantly weakened, every little improvement counted now. After activating both of the Ring of Gospel skills, he jumped off the platform and allowed gravity to drag him down toward the bottomless abyss. A few seconds after he started his free fall to the abyss, a series of dragon roars came from some distance away. As he had predicted, the 3 infant black dragons flew out of the abyss and charged straight at him once more. A short moment later, one of the infant dragons arrived before Shi Feng and sent its gigantic claw smashing at him. Seemingly unaffected by Miniature World, the dragon's claw still carried enough power to tear through space. This hit will determine whether I can succeed or not. Having prepared for this attack beforehand, Shi Feng promptly lashed out against the approaching claw with the abyssal blade. In the next moment, the blazing red abyssal blade cut at the infant dragon's massive claw. Boom! When the 2 attacks collided, a loud metallic clang echoed throughout the abyss, and dazzling sparks illuminated the space around Shi Feng and the infant black dragon. Surprisingly, the dragon's massive claw actually got knocked off course and smashed into the cliff wall nearby, digging out a huge chunk of the cliff. Shi Feng, on the other hand, came out of the clash completely unscathed. Moreover, the impact accelerated his descent into the abyss even further. Good. There's a chance. Shi Feng grew ecstatic when the abyssal blade deflected the infant dragon's claw. Previously, his greatest worry was that he would not be able to block the infant black dragon's attacks. After all, he did not activate Heavenly Dragon's power, unlike before. Besides, the infant black dragons had the home ground advantage, free of the abyss's suppression. Even with the effects of Miniature World, he would most likely have a difficult time deflecting the infant dragon's attacks. Fortunately, the simplified Holy Devour was sufficiently powerful. Now, even without activating a berserk skill, he could hold his ground against the infant black dragons. With this, what he needed to do next became a lot simpler. Following which, Shi Feng continued free-falling while frantically deflecting the 3 infant dragons' attacks. When he was about to reach the location of the legacy fragments, he activated Gale Domain and forcefully changed his angle of descent toward the legacy fragments. After spotting the location of the legacy fragments, Shi Feng promptly activated Power of Darkness, increasing all his basic attributes by 120%, then executed a 2-handed slash at the cliff wall. Holy Devour! A raging inferno immediately devoured the cliff wall, creating a hole with a 30-yard radius. At the same time, a fragmented statue the size of a human adult landed inside the hole, radiating a faint glow and a soul-shuddering divine might. System, you have discovered a legacy fragment. Do you wish to absorb the fragment's legacy power? Absorb, Shi Feng said without hesitation. As soon as he finished speaking, the fragmented statue released an aurora of lights that pierced his body. Just how much legacy power is in this thing? Shi Feng was stunned when he saw the loading bar that appeared before him. According to the loading bar, the absorption process would take 33 minutes. This absorption time far exceeded his expectations. It also far exceeded the total duration of all of his berserk skills. However, under the circumstances, he did not have the leeway to go for a different fragment. If he chose to give up on this fragment, then all of the effort he had put into killing all those Outer Path Guardians would go to waste. At this time, the 3 infant black dragons noticed what Shi Feng was doing. Immediately, all 3 of them used Dragon Breath at him. Damn it. Shifeng's complexion darkened when he saw that the 3 dragon breaths covered the entire cave he was in. Instinctively, he activated absolute defense to protect himself. After the 3 dragon breaths landed, the size of the cave increased significantly, which gave Shifeng a lot more room for maneuvering. Following which, time flew as Shifeng desperately defended himself against the 3 infant dragons' attacks. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. 20 minutes. Only 30 minutes had elapsed by the time the duration of Shifeng's final berserk skill, disintegration power, expired. Although he had done his best to fight in his normal state as much as possible and only use his berserk skills when absolutely necessary, he still exhausted all his berserk skills by the 30-minute mark. Without the support of any berserk skills, he had no choice but to rely on the simplified Holy Devour to defend against the 3 infant dragons' attacks. However, although the simplified Holy Devour required less concentration to execute than even Light Shadow, the burden from spamming the technique still took its toll on him. As a result, his complexion grew paler as more time passed. Human, your time is up. You're almost out of stamina and concentration already, while we are still able to continue fighting. Don't even think of leaving alive after you've trespassed into the territory of black dragons. The leading infant black dragon spoke in an ancient language. Despite Shifeng having no knowledge of this language, his mind actually understood the infant dragon's words. No sooner had the infant black dragon finished speaking than the 2 other infant dragons increased their attack rate, giving Shifeng no room to catch a breather. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. As the 3 infant black dragons' attack rate continuously increased, Shifeng had no choice but to use his trump cards one after another. Darkness Domain. Thunder God's Descent. Divine Steps. Void Shield. However, his complexion paled subsequently with each trump card he expended. His brain was also plagued by a stinging pain that dulled his control over his body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Is this it for me? At this moment, Shifeng could tell that he had already exceeded the limits of his concentration and that he was losing control over his physical body. Now, he couldn't execute the simplified Holy Devour anymore, completely reliant on dodging the 3 infant dragons' attacks to keep himself alive. Void Shield's duration was also about to run out, and as soon as it did, the 3 infant dragons would instantly kill him. Just as Void Shield's duration was about to end, however, a system notification sounded in Shifeng's ears. System, congratulations. Your Tier 4 legacy completion rate has reached 102%. Do you wish to activate your Tier 4 legacy? Chapter 2692, Tier 4 Legacy that surpasses 100% 102%? Despite his waning consciousness, when Shifeng heard the system's mechanical voice, he could not help getting startled. In his previous life, he had never heard of anyone accumulating their Tier 4 legacy's completion rate beyond 100%. At best, one could raise it to 100% and fully unlock all the information their Tier 4 legacy offered. Now, however, his Tier 4 legacy had reached 102% completion rate. Just what did that mean? Shifeng did not dwell on the matter. Now that he had met the requirements to activate his Tier 4 legacy, he activated it without hesitation. Unfortunately, even after he had chosen to activate his Tier 4 legacy, the 3 infant black dragons showed no signs of letting up. In the next moment, one of the dragon's claws smashed down at Shifeng. Damn it! Even if players managed to activate their Tier 4 legacy, it did not mean that their promotion quest was over. Only after learning an adequate amount of the information contained in their Tier 4 legacy and leaving the legacy land safely would players be considered to have completed their Tier 4 promotion quest. Since there was no room for Shifeng to dodge the approaching claw and he had no concentration left to execute the simplified Holy Devour, he chose to block the attack with his 2 swords. Boom! Shifeng's entire body smashed into the ground with a boom. At the same time, cracks formed on his void shield. Thank goodness I have the void shield to absorb the attack's damage. Otherwise, that move would have taken away at least 1/5 of my HP. Shifeng inwardly celebrated when he saw the cracks on the void shield. With the infant black dragons having the home ground advantage, even if he had the heavenly dragon's breath strengthening him and suppressing the dragons, the disparity in strength between the two sides was still massive. Only if he activated a berserk skill would he stand a chance against the dragons. However, as soon as Shifeng pulled himself out of the ground, another claw attack came at him. To make matters worse, before the claw attack even arrived, Void Shield's duration ended, and the barrier protecting him shattered into oblivion. The movement speed bonus he received from Void Shield also disappeared. As a result, he could rely on only his normal speed to dodge the approaching claw. Foolish human. Now that you've lost your final card, even though you managed to activate your legacy, you still won't leave this place alive. The leading infant dragon said as it looked down at Shifeng, a hint of ridicule glinting in its golden pupils. It was in no hurry to attack him at all. Sure enough, it is still too much for me. Shifeng did not try to refute the infant dragon's mockery. Instead, he simply looked at the three infant dragons quietly. According to his original plan, after he had activated his legacy, he would rely on his life-saving measures to put more distance between himself and the abyss to lessen the abyss's suppression effect. He would then try to learn his legacy while escaping. However, he never thought that absorbing the legacy fragment would take up so long that, by the time he finished absorbing the fragment's legacy power, he would have used up all his berserk skills and life-saving skills already. In fact, he had even pushed his concentration to its very limits. It wouldn't be strange if he simply collapsed and lost consciousness right now. Meanwhile, even though he succeeded in activating his Tier 4 legacy, in his current state, trying to learn his Tier 4 legacy while going up against the three infant black dragons' attacks was simply a fantasy. Although there were differences in complexity between the Tier 4 legacies found in God's domain, normally, the more powerful a legacy was, the more difficult it would be to learn it. While he did not know how complex the Blade Saint's Tier 4 legacy was, it shouldn't be easy. Going by his past experiences, players would have only 1 short hour to learn their Tier 4 legacy after activating it. So long as they could learn one of the several topics offered, they would acquire their Tier 4 legacy and complete their Tier 4 promotion quest. In the past, Shifeng had never once managed to learn a topic from his Tier 4 legacy within 1 hour. As for the experts that reached Tier 4, the majority of them had just barely managed to finish learning one topic within 1 hour. And even the record holder for the fastest person to learn a topic from their Tier 4 legacy had spent nearly half an hour to do so. In his current situation, where he had to fight 3 infant black dragons in a high-gravity environment, just how was he supposed to learn a topic from his Tier 4 legacy within half an hour? As Shifeng was smiling bitterly, the sound of a notification entered his ears. System, you have activated your Tier 4 legacy. You have unlocked all 4 learning topics of your legacy. You have 1 hour to learn them. So long as you learn just one topic listed below, you will be promoted to Tier 4. Formless Blade, Action Type, requires Sword Peak Tier 4 Legacy skill when activated, attacks any target within a 300-yard radius 13 times. Every attack carries 180% strength and causes 240% darkness damage. Cooldown, 15 seconds learning condition. Achieve 75% skill completion rate, Magic Light Assault. Action Type, requires Sword Peak Tier 4 Legacy skill when activated, user will transform into the image of a sword that attacks a target within a 500-yard radius. When transformed, movement speed is increased by 300%, strength by 100%, and agility by 100%. Cooldown, 18 seconds learning condition. Achieve 78% skill completion rate, Blade Guard. Action Type, requires Sword Apex Tier 4 Legacy skill. Draw upon the power of a sword to create a formless wall that absorbs 100% physical damage from one attack. Duration, 3 seconds. Cooldown, 21 seconds learning condition. Achieve 80% skill completion rate, Blade Domain. Domain Type, requires Sword Apex Tier 4 Legacy skill. Inject one's own mana into a sword to create a blade domain that covers a 500-yard radius. While Blade Domain is active, user may control up to 7 magic swords, each carrying 180% strength and causing 300% divine damage. Duration, 5 minutes cooldown, 1 hour learning condition. Achieve 85% skill completion rate. For legacy skills at peak rank and above? Moreover, there is even the extremely rare Apex domain skill. Is this the effect of a 102% completion rate? Shifeng could not help doubting his eyes when he saw the content of the system notifications. In God's domain, even for peak legacies, one would be fortunate to see even one peak legacy skill during the Tier 4 promotion quest. In fact, players that activated their Tier 4 legacy at 100% completion rate would only have a chance to learn 2 peak legacy skills. As for Apex legacy skills, there was only a certain chance for them to appear for peak legacy holders. For most players, though, Apex legacy skills were akin to myths. After all, just learning one peak Tier 4 legacy skill would grant Tier 4 players the strength to go up against superior mythic-ranked monsters of the same level. Unlike ordinary Tier 3 skills and Tier 3 legacy skills, which relied on mana for activation, Tier 4 legacy skills could also use legacy power. By using legacy power to activate a Tier 4 legacy skill, players could continue infusing mana into their skill past the minimum requirement in order to raise the power of their legacy skill. And once a peak Tier 4 legacy skill reached its maximum power, a Tier 4 player fully geared in epic weapons and equipment could use it to stand toe-to-toe against superior mythic-ranked monsters of the same level. It was also due to the existence of peak Tier 4 legacy skills that many peak experts had chosen not to complete their Tier 4 promotion quests despite having the ability to do so. For the majority of Tier 3 experts, though, just reaching Tier 4 was already a dream, what more trying to learn a peak Tier 4 legacy skill. Now, however, not only did Shifeng have 2 peak Tier 4 legacy skills to choose from, but he even had 2 Apex Tier 4 legacy skills. However, Shifeng's expression quickly darkened slightly. In the past, out of all the advanced Tier 4 legacy skills he was offered during his promotion quests, even the most powerful one only required him to execute the skill at a 70% completion rate to learn it. Now, even the easiest peak legacy skill he was offered required him to achieve a 75% completion rate, whereas the most difficult, Blade Domain, required an 85% skill completion rate. That was basically asking him to unleash 100% of Blade Domain's power. Normally, when using Tier 4 skills and spells, Tier 4 experts would only be able to achieve a 70% completion rate or so. Even Tier 4 peak experts would be able to activate a Tier 4 skill or spell at 85% completion rate only after long training. After all, the complexity of Tier 4 skills and spells was much greater than that of Tier 3 skills and spells. Now, however, he was given only 1 hour to learn at least one peak legacy skill to such a high standard. This was simply impossible. During the time Shifeng was silently cursing the learning requirements, the 3 infant black dragons hovering in midair swooped down at him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Die, human. The 3 infant dragons appeared almost simultaneously around Shifeng and sent their claws smashing at him, their claws forming a perfect encirclement that left no room for evasion. Screw it. It's all or nothing. Since there was no way for him to dodge the incoming claws, Shifeng gritted his teeth and chose to learn the most difficult of the 4 legacy skills offered. Blade Domain. Chapter 2693, Blade Domains might. Just as the 3 dragon claws were about to hit Shifeng, paragraphs of texts and numerous images suddenly filled his mind. These texts and images were none other than the introduction to Blade Domain. Right after these texts and images appeared, an invisible ripple from the abyssal blade spread up to 500 yards into the surroundings in the blink of an eye. A moment after the ripple appeared, a frightening shockwave rocked the cave Shifeng stood in. It was so powerful that even a large boulder the size of a human adult went flying out of the cave and plunging into the bottomless abyss. When the 3 infant black dragons hovering above Shifeng saw this, their eyes widened in shock as they stared at the human, who was clearly near death's door. So, this is an Apex Tier 4 legacy domain? Shifeng was astonished as he looked at the 3 massive claws that had stopped just 1 yard away from him. Currently, each of the 3 dragon claws was blocked by a 4-meter-long magic sword, unable to proceed even an inch further. System, Blade Domain activated successfully. Skill completion rate, 65%. Learning condition not met. You may use Blade Domain again in 30 seconds. 65%. It seems I made the right bet. Shi Feng breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw the system notification. Truthfully, he was not confident of learning a Tier 4 skill. After all, he had never learned one before, let alone peak and apex Tier 4 legacy skills. He had been fortunate to activate the Tier 4 skill successfully on his first try. In the past, when he was learning the advanced Tier 4 legacy skills of his class, it took him over 10 minutes just to activate the skills once successfully. And although he was now a domain realm expert, he still was not confident of successfully learning peak or apex Tier 4 legacy skills within an hour. Meanwhile, in order to resolve his current predicament, he couldn't rely on a skill that provided only offensive or defensive capabilities. A skill that increased his movement speed temporarily also wouldn't do him much good. If he wished to survive, his only option was to learn a domain skill, which could be used for both offense and defense. Moreover, a domain skill was very useful for group combat. Aside from that, he had taken the initiative to learn Blade Domain, which should have been the most difficult skill to learn out of the 4 available options, because he had a big advantage to rely on: his affinity for mana. Previously, his affinity for mana was subpar at best. His control over mana wasn't particularly good either. However, after having his soul strengthened by a soul array, his affinity for and control over mana had risen to whole new heights. Due to this reason, he had chosen to learn Blade Domain. Given the current circumstances, it would seem that he had made the right decision. He had not only succeeded in activating Blade Domain on his first attempt but even achieved a 65% completion rate. He could also sense that he still had plenty of room for improvement. According to his past experiences in learning skills, if he could successfully activate a skill at 65% completion rate on his first try, then he should be able to raise his skill completion rate to 80% or beyond within the next hour. Human, don't celebrate yet. Although a Tier 4 domain skill is indeed powerful, without a Tier 4 body, you won't be able to exhibit its true power at all. The leading infant black dragon sneered when it saw Shi Feng sighing in relief. After saying so, the infant dragon swept its tail at Shi Feng and shattered the magic sword that had managed to stop its claw attack earlier. When the 2 other infant dragons saw this scene, they promptly copied their leader's actions, executing a tail swipe. This situation forced Shi Feng to reconstruct the magic swords frantically to defend against these tail swipes. For a time, magic swords continuously formed and shattered around Shi Feng. However, as forming magic swords required the use of mana, after 20 seconds of this process, Shi Feng had already lost 10% of his mana. At this rate, he would run out of mana in just 3 more minutes and would no longer be able to sustain Blade Domain. Human, die. So long as we are here, you humans will never lay your hands on the ancient legacy here. The leading infant black dragon bellowed as it looked at Shi Feng's pale complexion. At this time, controlling his mana started to feel somewhat taxing. When trying to mold mana into a specific form, one would have an easier time doing so with abundant mana. In other words, as Shi Feng's mana decreased, the difficulty of molding his mana into magic swords would conversely increase. He estimated that if his mana were to fall below the 30% threshold, Blade Domain would most likely be unsustainable. Die. When the infant black dragon saw that Shi Feng had already lost 20% of his mana, they simultaneously executed a Tier 3 draconic skill, Darkness Smash, with their tails. Combined with their strength, the power this skill could exhibit easily reached the intermediate Tier 4 standard. It simply wasn't an attack the magic swords could hope to stop. Don't even think of killing me so easily. After seeing that 30 seconds had gone by already, Shi Feng activated Blade Domain once more. This time, he was much more careful when activating Blade Domain. He utilized only the minimum amount of mana to draw the required magic array on the abyssal blade. Boom! In the next moment, a crater formed in the ground before Shi Feng. At the same time, an astonished look appeared on the infant dragons' faces. Shi Feng had blocked their attacks again. How did he improve so quickly? When the infant black dragons saw the magic swords that had formed before them, they could not help eyeing Shifeng warily. System: Blade domain activated successfully. Skill completion rate: 75%. Learning condition not met. You may use blade domain again in 30 seconds. What the infant dragons did not know was that, when they were forcing Shifeng to create more magic swords and deplete his mana, they had also been helping him familiarize himself with the process of creating blade domain's magic swords. As a result, he became increasingly adept at manipulating the domain skill's mana. Hence, he succeeded in activating the skill a second time with much greater efficiency. So that's the case. The activation of Tier 4 skills and spells is no longer dependent on just the technique of players. Instead, it requires the integration of mana control and technique. It's no wonder I had such a difficult time learning Tier 4 legacy skills in the past. When Shifeng saw the power of his blade domain increase by a significant margin, realization immediately dawned upon him. After thinking up to this point, he started using even less mana to conjure the magic swords, thereby reducing the volatility of his mana and improving its finesse. Following which, time elapsed. Every time Shifeng activated blade domain, he managed to improve its completion rate slightly. 77%, 79%, 81%. As blade domain kept strengthening, the three infant black dragons grew increasingly dispirited. Initially, they were overwhelming Shifeng. Eventually, they ended up fighting on par with him. Now, he actually held the upper hand in battle, relying on 6 magic swords to suppress them and reduce the number of attacks they could execute. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After 50 minutes or so had passed. System: Blade domain activated successfully. Skill completion rate: 85%. Learning condition met. Do you wish to be promoted into a Tier 4 Blade Saint and utilize Blade Domain as the core for your mana body? Promote. Chapter 2694 Sword Emperor. At last, as soon as Shifeng chose to proceed with his promotion, he felt as if a hidden door in his mana body had opened, and beyond the door was a mana treasury. Not only did the opening of this door increase the total amount of mana he wielded by a significant margin, but even the excess mana his body radiated had undergone a qualitative transformation. If the mana he radiated before was in a gaseous state, then the mana he radiated now would be in a liquid state. The density and purity of his mana were on a completely different level than before. Moreover, as the dense mana inside this treasury spread throughout his body, Shifeng's waning consciousness perked up considerably. He could conjure up 6 magic swords with little to no effort. And the mana constituting these magic swords was so dense that the swords looked and felt as if they were solid metal. In the next moment, Shifeng sent a magic sword stabbing at the leading infant black dragon. The sword crossed the distance of 10 yards instantly and caught the infant dragon completely off guard. The magic sword pierced the infant dragon's tough scales and left a deep gash on its body, the injury causing the infant dragon to shriek in pain. As for the 2 other infant dragons, although Shifeng had also sent magic swords stabbing at them, as the 2 of them were farther away, they were able to react to his attack in time, defending themselves with their claws. Even so, when their claws clashed with the magic swords, both infant dragons got knocked back by over a dozen yards, the impact causing their claws to tremble. At a glance, it was obvious that the strengths of the 2 sides were no longer on the same level. Is this the true strength of a Tier 4 class? Shifeng was surprised and excited when he saw the magic swords successfully injuring and repelling the infant black dragons. System: Congratulations! You have become a Tier 4 Blade Saint, Sword Emperor. You have activated the Apex Legacy Core. All basic attributes plus 2000, all resistances plus 150, mana recovery rate increased by 100%, all basic attributes increased by 100%, and physique increased by 150%. All physical and magical attacks below Tier 4 received will be weakened by 30%, rewarding 100 legacy skill points. Just in terms of basic attributes, he had already reached a realm that Tier 3 players could only look at in despair, let alone the boost to his physique. If a Tier 3 player did not possess a set of extraordinary weapons and equipment, they would merely be cannon fodder in front of a Tier 4 player. Besides, there was the astonishing transformation in the quality of his mana. He was like an entirely different creature compared to when he was still at Tier 3. In God's domain, mana was the foundation of all life. Without mana, there would basically be no life. From fighting the infant black dragons, Shifeng understood just how much a player's mana would affect the potency of their skills and spells. Now that his mana was practically liquid, even if he had the same basic attributes, combat standards, and physique as a Tier 3 player, the said Tier 3 player still wouldn't last more than a few moves against him. After all, the power of the skills the two of them wielded would be on completely different levels. However, even though Shifeng had successfully repelled the 3 infant black dragons, he did not dare to idle around. He immediately manipulated his mana and formed his mana domain, then flew up and away from the bottomless abyss. He had no intention of clashing with the 3 infant dragons at all. Currently, he might have reached Tier 4 already and even gained the strength to hold his own against the 3 infant black dragons, but that was it. Killing the 3 infant dragons was still impossible for him. After all, now that he had gotten promoted to Tier 4, he could no longer spam Blade Domain like before. Once Blade Domain's duration ended, he would be forced to utilize his own body to clash with the infant dragons. With his limited stamina, he would definitely fall first before he could kill the 3 infant dragons. Now that he had already achieved his goal, he naturally had no reason to continue fighting the 3 infant black dragons. The sooner he left this dangerous place, the better. Fortunately, so long as players reached Tier 4 in God's domain and managed to form the passive-type mana domain, they could fly using their own mana, no longer reliant on external items to do so. Despicable human, don't even think of leaving. The 3 infant black dragons saw through Shifeng's thoughts. They widened their mouths and blew dragon breath at him without hesitation. In the next moment, the 3 dark beams the 3 infant dragons released merged into one and rapidly extended toward Shifeng, the resultant beam turning everything in its path into an empty void. The AoE of the beam made escaping its range in time impossible. Come! However, despite the combined dark beam's approach, Shifeng showed no sign of fear at all. On the contrary, a hint of excitement and anticipation gleamed in his eyes. He had just been promoted to Sword Emperor and was still unfamiliar with his new strength. When he was controlling Blade Domain's magic swords, he had merely executed the most basic forms of attack using them. He was extremely eager to see just how strong he was, now that he had risen to Tier 4. Meanwhile, the 3 infant dragons' combined dragon breath was undoubtedly the perfect target for testing his strength. In the next moment, Shifeng started executing his defensive combat technique, Sword's Orbit, using the 6 magic swords he had conjured, creating a defensive sphere that covered a 30-yard radius around him. Boom! When the massive beam of light came into contact with the beautiful galaxy of stars around Shifeng, space around them suddenly transformed into an empty void, as if Armageddon had just arrived. If other players were to see this scene, they would definitely be dumbfounded. While looking at the empty void that had formed above them, the 3 infant black dragons revealed a smirk on their faces. The combination attack they had just executed was far stronger than a single dragon breath. It was also the strongest move the 3 of them possessed. Although Shifeng had already been promoted to Tier 4, if he received the attack without using an invulnerability skill, he would still sustain heavy injuries. However, when the empty void started recovering to its original state, the smirks on the infant dragons' faces disappeared, replaced with a look of shock. After all, at this moment, let the lone Shifeng suffering injuries, even his equipment wasn't scratched. It was as if their combination attack was nothing but a light breeze to him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Even an advanced combat technique has been strengthened to such an extent? Shifeng was astonished as he looked at the empty void around him. Although he had known that Sword's Orbit was up to defending against the 3 infant black dragons' combined dragon breath, as he now possessed much greater basic attributes, he never thought that he could stop their attacks so easily. Earlier he had clearly used Sword's Orbit just like normal, Yet it was as if the technique had transformed into a magic array. The moment he executed Sword's orbit, the ambient mana had actually gathered around him and strengthened the power of his technique, to the point where it was equivalent to a Tier 4 defensive skill. Given Sword's orbit's performance, Shifeng suddenly felt that, if not for Blade Domain's limited duration, he might really have a chance of killing one of the 3 infant black dragons. Meanwhile, seeing that Blade Domain's duration was about to run out, Shifeng hurriedly controlled his mana and flew to the space-time vortex in the sky above the bottomless abyss and disappeared from the legacy land, leaving behind 3 dumbfounded infant black dragons. Chapter 2695. Sudden Change in God's Domain. Exodus Tales V2 Chapter 1. Sudden change in God's domain. Damn it. That heaven-blessed bastard got away. We're doomed. What should we do? How do we explain this to that great personage? Anger and panic filled the eyes of the 3 infant black dragons as they watched Shifeng leave the bottomless abyss through the space-time vortex. A sense of helplessness also suffused their trembling voices when they spoke. Our original plan is already ruined, now that the legacy has been stolen. That great personage will definitely not spare us, once he finds out. At this point, all we can do is scatter and flee. Otherwise, none of us will survive. That's our only option now. Hopefully, that great personage will focus his anger on that heaven-blessed bastard so that our chances of survival will be a little better. After the leading infant dragon spoke up, the 3 quickly reached a consensus. They then flapped their black wings, their hearts brimming with anger at Shifeng as they fled the bottomless abyss. Simultaneously, they also gloated over the misfortune awaiting him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the space-time vortex, Shifeng was wholly unaware of the discussion that had just taken place among the infant black dragons. After experiencing a momentary blackout, like before, he found himself back inside the secret room of Zero Wing's residence in Silverwing City. I did it. Tier 4. I became a real Tier 4. An indescribable sense of joy and excitement welled up within Shifeng as he observed the liquid mana surging toward his body from all around. The dense mana continuously replenished his body's depleted mana and mended his haggard spirit. He had finally accomplished the goal that had eluded him in his previous life. Moreover, he had even reached Tier 4 with the hidden class Blade Saint. In terms of basic attributes and skills, what the Blade Saint class offered was leaps and bounds stronger than ordinary Tier 4 classes. Now, he was a true powerhouse in God's domain, and even the various NPC kingdoms would have to respect him. As Shifeng reveled in his success, the system's cold, monotonous voice suddenly entered his ears. System announcement: God's domain will undergo a major update. Simultaneously, the new expansion pack, Hero's Return, will be activated. All players will be logged out in 30 minutes. The update's estimated duration is 1 natural day. The system announcement appeared 3 times consecutively. Inevitably, everyone in God's domain was shocked. Shifeng was no exception. A major update? How is this possible? Shifeng looked at the system announcement displayed before him in confusion. Even after he reread it several times, incomprehension and doubt still filled his eyes. There were plenty of system updates in God's domain. However, even in his previous life, the game had undergone only 2 major updates throughout his 10 years of gaming. The first major update occurred 3 years after God's domain's official launch. There had already been plenty of Tier 4 players in the game at that time, and Tier 3 players were everywhere. Some players had even started attempting their Tier 5 promotions. Yet now, how long had it been since God's domain launched? God's domain's first major update was also the most memorable event for Shifeng. The update had shaken the entire world, transforming God's domain into the world's only game and entertainment. After the first major update, God's domain had become a completely different world from before, no longer the virtual reality game everyone thought it was. God's domain had become an existence beyond everyone's imagination. Players were no longer players but a group of special entities in God's domain. Be it God's domain's NPCs or monsters, both had existed as real people after the update, with their own lives and personalities. They had existed for the sake of survival. These changes had made God's Domain a completely different world, no longer just a virtual reality game, but an existence that could instead affect the real world. At this moment, Shi Feng wasn't the only person puzzled by the sudden arrival of this major update. Many players and the upper echelons of major powers were similarly surprised and confused by this situation. A major update? And it's even going to take one natural day? What is going on? Crap, I haven't even reached Tier 3, yet the system's going through an upgrade. Is the system trying to take my life? For a while, players in God's Domain voiced their complaints about and exasperation over the sudden system update. The update duration of one natural day caught everyone off guard, and they didn't know what to do with this unexpected free time. After all, at this point, God's Domain had long since become a part of their lives. Logging into God's Domain every day had already become an instinct. The previous system updates had lasted only a few to a dozen real-world hours. This 24-hour system update was simply maddening. Anyone who entered God's Domain as part of the first batch of players knew that the difficulty of leveling up and killing monsters would increase substantially after a system update. The requirements for players' techniques would also increase. Hence, the major update would undoubtedly be a nightmare for players who had yet to reach Tier 3. The arrival of this update would also bring a massive change for the various powers in God's Domain. After all, this update would reduce the number of players capable of reaching Tier 3. The difficulty and resources required to nurture their guild's internal experts would also increase. This, in turn, would cripple their current development plans, and they would have to restart their planning from scratch. However, while some powers felt dissatisfied and angry over this major update, others were overjoyed, especially the new powers and corporations that had joined the game just recently. The increase in the difficulty of leveling up and obtaining resources would undoubtedly destabilize the status quo in God's Domain. If the newcomers properly grasped this opportunity, they could replace God's Domain's veteran powers. The atmosphere among God's Domain's various powers became extraordinarily tense. While frantically poaching talents and purchasing resources, many of these powers also drastically reduced the resources for ordinary and low-potential members. In turn, this prompted many guild players to leave their respective guilds for greener pastures. While God's Domain's various powers were taking action, Liang Jing hurriedly contacted Shi Feng. Guild leader, all major powers are currently purchasing coins and resources on a large scale. Shall we start buying as well? Liang Jing asked anxiously. That won't be necessary. Shi Feng couldn't help chuckling when he heard Liang Jing's words. Haven't those superpowers been constantly preventing us from acquiring funds? We'll now dispose of all the coins we earned through Silverwing City during this period. Let them buy as much as they want. Guild leader? Shi Feng's words took Liang Jing aback, her mind unable to comprehend his intentions. The various powers were currently doing all they could to purchase coins and resources, yet Shi Feng wanted to sell Zero Wing's coins in bulk. Once the system update ended, Zero Wing would end up in a pinch. Just do it. Shi Feng smiled but didn't offer any additional explanation. According to past system updates, purchasing coins and resources in bulk was indeed the correct move. However, the system update this time would be different from previous ones. After the major update, not only would resources not be scarce, but obtaining them would become easier instead. Even leveling up would become less taxing. However, the major update wasn't all sunshine and rainbows either. After the major update, whether external or internal, the requirements for players' promotion would become more stringent. Notably, the changes made toward mana would require a greater understanding and control of mana to manipulate it properly. Hence, all peak experts in his previous life had also been master magicians. Once everyone goes offline, have Melancholic and the others meet me in the conference room. I have something to discuss with them, Shi Feng said. He hadn't gained only a newfound understanding of mana during his Tier 4 promotion quest but also a strange metal that repelled mana. This was his first time seeing such a metal. So long as this item wasn't damaged beyond repair, they could refine it into a weapon or equipment. The mana repulsion effect was beneficial to players. After all, Mana was everything in God's domain. There would be no life without mana. Naturally, monsters couldn't survive without mana. If he could successfully recast the metal, he would have the capital to contend against the various superpowers. Such an item would be helpful when he explored dangerous forbidden lands to acquire resources necessary for conquering the Tier 4 promotion quest. In God's domain, high-level forbidden lands contained most of the resources capable of helping players reach Tier 4. Although Shi Feng had already reached Tier 4, if he visited these places by himself, the best he could do was survive. He wouldn't be able to conduct a proper exploration of these locations. During his previous life, the various superpowers typically sent teams of Tier 4 players to explore these places. Going alone would be suicide. I'll contact them now. Liang Jing then disconnected the call. Frozen World, Frost Heaven City, Frost Heaven's headquarters. Due to God's domain's sudden system update, Frost Heaven had also hurriedly convened a meeting to discuss the changes that would occur to the game. Currently, over a dozen people sat in the magnificent conference room. Every one of these people was an existence capable of shaking the real world with their every step. At this moment, however, these people had nervous expressions as they looked at the middle-aged man seated at the front of the room. This middle-aged man looked very amiable. Although he had an unyielding appearance, the aura he gave off felt like a spring breeze. However, none of the people present could relax in his presence. "That's it for the meeting," the middle-aged man said, adjourning the meeting. He then shifted his gaze to Mushin and the petite girl beside her, saying, "Mushin, both of you stay behind." "Yes, sir." As if they had received an amnesty, everyone unrelated promptly rushed off, leaving the middle-aged man, Mushin, and the petite Crue sitting quietly inside the large conference room. "Uncle Hong, do you have good news to share?" Mushin asked fawningly as she looked at the stern, middle-aged man. "Little girl, you're still pretending? Do you honestly think you can hide the fact that you've invited Zero Wing from everyone?" Nonchalantly, the middle-aged man added, "You should know how rare this opportunity is. This will be a gathering of titans. Even those so-called superpowers can only dream of joining. This is also an opportunity for Frost Heaven to become a true titan, yet you invited some unknown outsiders to participate." Upon hearing this, Mushin automatically turned to Crue beside her. In response, Crue stuck out her tongue playfully and smiled, expressing, "So what if I told on you?" Mushin sighed and shook her head in helplessness toward this little sister of hers. "Uncle Hong, while they are indeed outsiders, you shouldn't underestimate their strength either. This goes especially for Black Flame," Mushin said unhurriedly. "How strong can he be? He's merely a peerless expert in the eyes of ordinary people." The middle-aged man referred to as Uncle Hong shook his head. "You should know what kind of people we are dealing with. Those people are the truly talented, possessing frightening potential and special bloodlines. They even have the full support of those major corporations. The peak experts on the secret pavilion's experts list and the various superpowers' peerless experts are but the tip of the iceberg." Uncle Hong is right. Being just stronger than average is nothing to those people, Crue said as she nodded with a smile. However, Black Flame is really strong. He can single-handedly contend against Tier 4 foe Saint Devourers. Although he can't be a part of the main force this time, he can still provide support from the sidelines, Mushin explained. "He can hold his ground against a Devourer?" Uncle Hong was slightly surprised by this information. It seems this person is indeed strong. What's so amazing about contending against a Devourer using brute force? Plenty of my subordinates can too, Crue said disapprovingly. Upon hearing Crue's words, Mushin had to resist the urge to pinch the girl's cheeks. She just explained, "Uncle Hong, that person has a mana domain as well. He will be of significant help with our plans." "He has a mana domain?" This revelation piqued Uncle Hong's interest. "This will indeed be of help to us. However, I'm afraid these things still aren't enough. You should know, as well, that an individual's strength is very limited in this upcoming operation. Moreover, the location we're visiting this time is extraordinary. So, I will have to personally inspect whether Zero Wings members can join this operation. You'll inspect in person? Mushin exclaimed in surprise. Uncle Hong's identity was preeminent. The guild leaders of super guilds and even those at the helm of major corporations had to treat him with respect. If he visited Zero Wings headquarters and news of it got out, it would cause a sensation among the various major corporations. Of course. In a severe tone, Uncle Hong said, the operation this time is of utmost importance. We cannot afford carelessness. But the time is almost up. This system update is also going to take one whole day. We'll be tight for time if we proceed with the inspection, Mushin objected. Don't worry. We'll just pay Zero Wings headquarters a short visit. It won't take much time, Uncle Hong said, smiling. Since you've made up your mind, leave Zero Wings inspection to me, Uncle Hong, Crue suddenly suggested. Zero Wing is a local tyrant. If they join in the operation this time, they will behave arrogantly. Also, seeing how much Big Sis admires that person's strength, I'm thinking of bringing Tiancheng of Frost Heaven's 10 swords along. 1. We can test whether Black Flame is as strong as Big Sis says. 2. We can show Zero Wing that not just anybody can join Frost Heaven's secret operation. Even if Zero Wing passes the inspection, they'll know how to behave during the operation. Mushin fell speechless upon hearing her little sister's words. The 10 swords were geniuses the Boulder Corporation had nurtured using all their technology and resources. Every one of them was a monster among monsters. They were also among the core combatants for the upcoming operation. It would be overkill to test Zero Wing using one of the 10 swords. Mushin, what do you think? Uncle Hong asked. I don't have any objections. Mushin agreed after giving the matter some thought. In her opinion, Shifeng shouldn't have any problems going up against Tiancheng with his strength. Good. Then if Zero Wing's strength is no good, you'll have to modify your agreement with them, Uncle Hong said, nodding. I understand. Mushin nodded obediently. Although she was the Boulder Corporation's heir, she couldn't go against her Uncle Hong's decisions. Big Sis, I have great expectations for you. Crue revealed a cute smile before logging off. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Hopefully, his performance won't disappoint Uncle Hong too much, Mushin prayed inwardly after seeing Crue leave. She had incurred a considerable expenditure to invite Zero Wing this time. If she annulled their contract, she would have to provide a lot of compensation. Meanwhile, in the top-floor conference room of Zero Wing's headquarters, Shifeng, who had just logged off, was sorting through the unknown metals information when he heard a knock on the door. Subsequently, the door to the conference room opened slowly, and a clear and pleasant voice came from outside. Guild leader, they're here. Chapter 2696, Ancient Fragments Exodus Tales Chapter 2696, Ancient Fragments under Liang Jing's lead, Melancholic Smile and several other people entered the luxurious and spacious conference room. Dressed in white lab coats, the group looked very much like a bunch of scientific researchers. At this time, Melancholic Smile and the others looked much more worn out than before. Exhaustion was apparent on their faces, and their hair was a mess, as if they had just recovered from a serious illness. Shifeng couldn't help his surprise at this situation. What's the matter with you? Why do you all look so haggard? Shifeng asked curiously. Since Zero Wing was now a large organization, it had plenty of management and production talents. There was no need for Melancholic Smile and the others to handle everything personally. Guild leader, I want to file a complaint, protested Cream Cocoa, who had a shy personality. A complaint? Shifeng was taken aback. Cream Cocoa was a master forger of Zero Wing. She also ranked among the top 3 in forging standards. It was only a matter of time before she became a grandmaster forger. Countless people in Zero Wing were hoping to get her to make them a weapon. If these people were to form a line, it would stretch from one end of Fenglin City to the other. After all, although Cream Cocoa and other master forgers had a meager chance of producing epic weapons and equipment, their chances of making dark gold weapons and equipment were considerable. In God's domain, epic weapons and equipment were exceedingly rare. Even the core members of first-rate guilds wouldn't necessarily own one. Hence, level 100+ dark gold weapons and equipment could already draw envy from passers-by. What more custom-made dark gold weapons and equipment? To put it simply, nobody in God's domain would dare bully Cream Cocoa. Anyone who did would be fortunate if Cream Cocoa just outright ignored them. Thus, I want to complain, guild leader. Cream Cocoa said resolutely. What do you want to complain about? Shifeng asked curiously. Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. Cream Cocoa said with her cheeks puffed out. They're too much. Guild leader, you need to give me justice. They're bullying you? That can't be, right? Shifeng couldn't help being surprised once more. Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow were the vice guild leaders of Zero Wing. They managed the guild properly, and everyone in the guild also respected them. He found it hard to imagine the two bullying a cute girl like Cream Cocoa. The two vice guild leaders asked us to complete 500 customized dark gold weapons in 5 days. They even threatened to cut our research funding if we don't meet the quota, Cream Cocoa complained. Guild leader, you're a master forger too, so you know how difficult it is to make level 100+ dark gold weapons. Let alone 5 days, we'll barely be able to make 500 in 10 days. The whole forging department has been working overtime, but we are still short 300 weapons after 3 days. No matter how you look at it, we can't complete them within the next 2 days. Melancholic Smile and the others nodded in agreement with Cream Cocoa's words. Customized level 100+ dark gold weapons were not cabbages. They were delicate works that required all of a forger's attention. The slightest mistake would lead to failure. That many? The number Cream Cocoa reported shocked Shifeng. 500 customized dark gold weapons was a significant number. Moreover, these weapons were level 100+ weapons. So many of such weapons could elevate a first-rate guild's core team's overall combat power to a whole new level. What weapon did those two ask you to make? Shifeng asked. It's this one. Cream Cocoa pulled out a tablet from her coat and swiped her finger across the screen, transferring the information on her tablet to the conference table's holographic projector. The projection of a black spear appeared above the table. The spear was as tall as an adult human, and engraved on it were intricate magic patterns. The spear looked extraordinary at a glance. What a powerful spear! Surprise filled Shifeng's eyes as he read the spear's detailed information. Thunder Spear. Spear, dark gold consumable, level 110 equipment requirement. Strength 2000 ignore levels plus 30 ignore defense. Throwing distance increases according to the wielder's strength with a maximum of 3000 yards. Causes 1000% lightning damage to a 20-yard radius upon impact. How is this even a weapon? It's a long-range missile. Unfortunately, the spear was only for one-time use. If it had no limit, raiding field bosses would be child's play. Even Tier 2 players could easily challenge Tier 4 mythic bosses with such a spear. If they could mass-produce this spear, siege warfare would become a joke. However, Shifeng also had to admit that the Thunder Spear's production was truly challenging. The required materials were secondary, costing only 20 gold or so in all. The crucial problem was the drawing of the magic patterns. If one weren't at the Master Magician standard, the production success rate would drop dramatically. Guild leader, please talk to the vice guild leaders. 5 days is too short. We need 10 days at least, Cream Cocoa pleaded pitifully. I can talk to them about it. Shifeng nodded. He felt that Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow were indeed being difficult. That's great. You're the best guild leader. Cream Cocoa breathed out a sigh of relief. However, no sooner had Cream Cocoa finished speaking than Shifeng did a U-turn, saying, however, I hope you all can do your best to make 3000 Thunder Spears during this period. Guild leader? Cream Cocoa couldn't believe her ears. I'm not trying to trouble you. Slowly, Shifeng explained, this item is indeed very important, especially with Zero Wing lacking in high-end combatants. With this trump card, we can teach those hostile superpowers a lesson. The various superpowers currently didn't recognize Zero Wing as a superpower because of the guild's lack of high-end combatants. However, a sufficient number of thunder spears could compensate for the guild's inadequate combat power. Of course, I won't make you work in vain. Shifeng chuckled as he looked at Cream Coco's bitter face. He then brought out the unknown metals information and said, "So long as you guys can complete this task, I'll let you research this metal." Cream Coco immediately criticized Shifeng's words in her mind, lumping her guild leader and vice-guild leaders in the same group. He was completely ignoring her wishes and ruthlessly using her as a beast of labor. She couldn't engage at all in the crafting job she liked. However, after seeing the information displayed above the table, she fell into a daze. Besides Cream Coco, Melancholic Smile and the other master forgers present were also stupefied, a passionate flame igniting in their eyes as they stared at the projection above the table. It expels all mana? How is this possible? There's such a metal in God's domain? Cream Coco and the others muttered to themselves as if possessed. The exhaustion on their faces had also vanished completely as countless thoughts flooded their minds, as if the door to a new world had just opened to them. Shifeng wasn't surprised by this situation either. For those devoted to the forging profession, a material like this only appeared in their dreams. After all, mana was the foundation of all things in God's domain. If one could completely expel mana from an object, one would be unstoppable. Just the thought of producing a weapon using such a metal excited these master forgers greatly. Why does this look familiar? Cream Coco mumbled as she read the metal fragments information. Familiar? You've seen them before? Shifeng asked with concern. These metal fragments were so mysterious that even his omniscient eyes couldn't glean any information from them. Hence, he planned to give it to the forging department for research. Michim, I think I read about them in an ancient book. Cream Coco nodded after giving the matter some thought. This type of metal existed in ancient times. However, it wasn't something that appeared naturally in God's domain but was created by ancient gods. Moreover, based on the appearance of these metal fragments, they should originally be parts of a whole. You're right. These metal fragments indeed look like the fragments of a sword, Shifeng said, nodding. Yet, for some reason, they can't be fused like fragmented legendary items. Although they can't be fused, I have a way to put these fragments together, Cream Coco said. But I'm not certain if this kind of patchwork will allow the weapon to exert its former power and effects. You have a way? Shifeng was even more surprised to hear this. These fragments were extraordinary. If they could be repaired to a certain extent and the resulting weapon only had the effect of expelling mana, it would still be a great weapon. There shouldn't be any problems, Cream Coco said with greater confidence. I'll leave these metal fragments with you. Just ask Melancholic for the materials you need. Shifeng did not doubt Cream Coco's confidence. After all, her talent was no joke. Only the short time she had come into contact with God's domain limited her. You said it yourself, guild leader. You must open all materials in the guild's material warehouse to me, Cream Coco said, beaming at Shifeng. All lifestyle players desperately needed precious materials. However, let alone legendary materials, even inferior legendary materials were hard to come by. Not even super guilds would give lifestyle players of her caliber free use of such materials. Now that Shifeng gave her carte blanche to use such materials, she naturally couldn't let this opportunity get away. Sure. Shifeng nodded. After giving the matter some more thought, though, he added, however, you still need to use them conservatively. Collecting those materials wasn't easy. Please rest assured, guild leader. I promise you I won't use them all, Cream Coco promised with a smile, afraid that Shifeng would take back his approval. Cream Coco behaved like a child who had just gotten a new toy, and Shifeng didn't know whether he should cry or laugh as he looked at her. Afterward, he sent all the information relevant to the metal fragments to Melancholic Smile and the others. As for whether the fragments could be repaired, he would leave that to luck. By the way, guild leader, the Azure Chamber of Commerce's members arrived yesterday. They are currently training with our guild's core members, and Duan Hanshan is their leader. However, as you have been busy, I didn't bother you about it, Liang Jing suddenly said. Duan Hanshan came in person? This piece of news puzzled Shifeng. Duan Hanshan was a giant in the Azure Chamber of Commerce. Typically, sending a management staff for a training meeting between guilds would be more than enough. It was inconceivable that a big shot like Duan Hanshan came in person. "Do you want to meet them now?" Liang Jing asked. "Since Duan Hanshan came here in person as the guild leader, I naturally have to meet him." "Make the necessary arrangements," Shifeng said. "I'll get it done now." Liang Jing promptly left the conference room. Meanwhile, as Shifeng discussed the ancient fragments with Cream Cocoa and the others, 2 men and 2 women walked toward Zero Wing Tower. And leading this group was an amiable, middle-aged man. After observing Zero Wing's internal members coming and going from the building for some time, Kure, the cute girl in a red dress, turned to the peerless beauty beside her. Smiling, she said, "Big sis, it looks like Zero Wing is only average." Not only are there barely any people here, but most of them haven't even reached the refinement realm yet. I can't imagine what powerful experts Zero Wing can offer the operation this time. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although Zero Wing's headquarters prosperity wouldn't necessarily have any relation to Zero Wing's strength, it should still reflect some of it. Mushin remained silent in response to Kurue's comment. While she knew that Zero Wing had just recently emerged, she never thought that the guild's headquarters would have so few members stationed in it. Moreover, the average strength of these members was appallingly weak. Let alone superpowers, they couldn't even hold a candle to the members found in the various pseudo-superpowers headquarters. "Alright, let's go in and have a look." Uncle Hong frowned slightly. However, he didn't dwell on the matter, entering the lobby of Zero Wing's headquarters together with Mushin and the others. Chapter 2697, Inspecting Zero Wing Tower's lobby. With a ceiling soaring 9 meters high, the lobby looked very much like a small stadium. Aside from the reception for visitors, it also had a cafe and a lounge area, as well as a virtual combat platform for the guild's internal members to entertain themselves and visitors. Due to these reasons, quite a lot of people had gathered in the lobby. When Mushin and her companions entered the lobby, they quickly noticed several hundred people thronged the virtual combat platform. These people were spectating a duel between Zero Wing's internal members, and the scene was very lively. After seeing Mushin's group entering the lobby, one of the front desk receptionists approached them and asked, "Hello, are you here to look around Zero Wing's headquarters? Or do you have other business to attend to here?" My 2 nieces are interested in Zero Wing, so I brought them here for a visit today," Uncle Hong explained with a smile. "Certainly." The receptionist smiled and took out 4 visitor cards. "You may visit up to the 9th floor with this visitor card. The floors beyond are only for internal members. If you have any questions after your tour, feel free to consult with the front desk." "Thank you." Uncle Hong nodded and accepted the visitor cards. Afterward, the receptionist returned to her position at the front desk and allowed Mushin's group to roam about the building freely. Zero Wing sure is generous. They're actually allowing outsiders to tour their headquarters. "This will save us a lot of trouble," Kurei commented in surprise as she received a visitor card from Uncle Hong. Usually, the various large guilds would place tight restrictions on their headquarters. Aside from the lobby, they generally wouldn't allow outsiders to visit other locations. They might be trying to lure more people to join Zero Wing, Mushin said. She more or less understood Zero Wing's circumstances. Although Zero Wing was prospering in God's domain, it remained an unknown entity in the real world. Despite having gone to great lengths to secure a guild headquarters, Zero Wing still lacked talents. Letting visitors tour its headquarters would undoubtedly give players unaware of Zero Wing's existence a better understanding of the guild. There are quite a few people here, but it's a pity that there are hardly any experts. Even the 2 people dueling are only at the half-step refinement realm, Kurei commented as she looked at the battle taking place at the virtual combat platform. She could tell the 2 duelists' combat standards at a glance. "I think we should be more cautious when partnering with such a guild. Our plan involves a lot of things. If outsiders see that we can't even find capable helpers, they'll start looking down on Frost Heaven." However, even after Kurei finished speaking, Uncle Hong, Muxin, and Tiancheng surprisingly remained silent as they stared at a group of young men and women standing among the crowd. How unexpected! Zero Wing really cannot be underestimated. They've actually kept such talents hidden, Uncle Hong praised as he looked at the several youths. Talents? Kurue stared at those ordinary-looking youths in confusion. Young miss, you shouldn't underestimate those people. Although their auras aren't apparent, they are bona fide experts. That blue-haired guy, in particular, has completely restrained his aura. If I hadn't scrutinized him, I'm afraid I wouldn't even be aware of his existence. Tiancheng, the seemingly vulnerable and honest youth standing beside Kurue, explained quietly. Honestly, I'm not confident I can win against him. How is that possible? Tiancheng's words stunned Kurue. She suspected that the latter was joking with her. Tiancheng was one of the peerless geniuses Frost Heaven cultivated. Not only had he reached the domain realm at a young age, but he also had a naturally gifted brain. His processing speed was much faster than ordinary people's. Even the older generation domain realm experts wouldn't necessarily be his match. How could Zero Wing possibly cultivate an expert rivaling Tiancheng? They shouldn't be Zero Wing members, Muxin suddenly said. They're not. Uncle Hong was slightly surprised. 4 such youthful experts to appear in Zero Wing's headquarters, how could they not be Zero Wing members? I've seen their information before. Although they look somewhat different in God's domain, their appearances are roughly the same. That blue-haired youth should be Solitary Frost, the strongest of Azure's younger generation. I heard even Violet Sword values him greatly, Muxin explained. Unlike Uncle Hong, who managed the guild from behind the scenes, Muxin was responsible for the guild's intelligence network. Hence, she had a much better understanding of God's domain's various powers than Uncle Hong, especially when it came to the various superpowers' younger generation. She placed great importance on collecting such information. Why would Azure's peerless genius run all the way here? Kurue grew even more puzzled at this revelation. The various superpowers treasured their peerless geniuses. They would shower these geniuses with all sorts of precious resources and require them to undergo strict training regimens every day. They wouldn't let these people leave their headquarters at will. Tiancheng was a similar case. If not to inspect Zero Wing's strength this time, he wouldn't have received permission to leave Frost Heaven's headquarters. Zero Wing really is interesting. Not only did Azure's peerless genius come running over, but so did an old fellow from Azure, Uncle Hong said as he gazed at a cool-headed, middle-aged man resting and drinking tea in a corner of the lobby. Old fellow. When Kurue checked the focus of Uncle Hong's attention, her mouth dropped wide open subconsciously. The man Uncle Hong was looking at was none other than Duan Hanshan, the strongest person of the Duan family's second generation. Duan Hanshan's reputation in the virtual gaming industry was in no way inferior to Uncle Hong's. Or, to put it in another way, she had grown up listening to the stories of these men. For such a big shot to visit Zero Wing's headquarters personally was definitely big news. At the same time Hong Xinyuan noticed Duan Hanshan also noticed Hong Xinyuan's presence. The two of them then smiled at each other. Let's head over, Hong Xinyuan said, smiling. After saying so, Hong Xinyuan made his way to Duan Hanshan. As for Muxin and the others, they obediently followed him while bating their breaths. Old Hong, what brings you here? Duan Hanshan greeted Hong Xinyuan with a smile. My 2 nieces are interested in Zero Wing, so I came to look around, Hong Xinyuan replied perfunctorily. However, I'm curious as to why the Western Continent's ice demon is here. There still shouldn't be much interaction between the Eastern and Western continents. The Azure Chamber of Commerce mainly operated on the Western continent, and the businesses it had on the Eastern continent were very few. No matter how he thought about it, there shouldn't be much contact between Azure and Zero Wing. Narrowing his eyes, Duan Hanshan refused to believe a single word from Hong Xinyuan's mouth. He then stroked his beard and said flatly, "It's nothing. I just brought some of Azure's newcomers for a training meeting with Zero Wing." You guys are here for training? Hong Xinyuan reflexively arched a brow at Duan Hanshan, doubt coloring his face. Let alone Hong Xinyuan, even Kurue thought Duan Hanshan was messing with them. Although she was a newcomer who had just entered the virtual gaming industry recently, she knew that the Azure Chamber of Commerce possessed an extraordinary foundation. It stood high above ordinary superpowers. In comparison, Zero Wing was a new guild that had just emerged along with God's domain. Who would believe that Azure would send its top talents to receive training from Zero Wing? What? Don't believe me? Duan Hanshan chuckled. If we were in a super guild's headquarters, I would definitely believe you, but Zero Wing? Hong Xinyuan chuckled and shook his head. Some guild operations indeed had to be kept confidential and could not be disclosed to outsiders. However, in Hong Xinyuan's opinion, Duan Hanshan's excuse was simply too poor. Saying that Azure's top talents had come to teach Zero Wing's newcomers would be more believable. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Duan Hanshan's smile grew even brighter when he heard Hong Xinyuan's reply. He then pointed at the nearby virtual combat platform and said, "We're going to have a coaching battle with Zero Wing in a moment. Since you don't believe me, how about we make a bet?" Bet? How are we betting? Hong Xinyuan asked out of curiosity. Didn't you bring a newcomer too? Duan Hanshan glanced at Tiancheng. Calmly he said, I can see he's quite good. How about you have him replace one of my newcomers? However, this is a precious spot, so I can't just let your newcomer join for free. I'll have to collect 5 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid as a deposit. Hong Xinyuan nearly choked at Duan Hanshan's proposal. Not only was Duan Hanshan asking his side to contribute manpower, but he was even asking for 5 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid. Duan Hanshan was too shameless. Don't be in a hurry to reject me. Upon seeing Hong Xinyuan's dark face, Duan Hanshan added, if you win this bet, I'll pay you back double. It seems you're quite optimistic of Zero Wing's members. Hong Xinyuan was somewhat surprised. 10 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid were enough to supply a top talent for half a year, a significant amount to any superpower. Sort of. Duan Hanshan nodded. However, if you lose, you'll have to compensate me with an additional 10 bottles. Hong Xinyuan was momentarily at a loss for words. Why did Duan Hanshan make it sound as if they would lose no matter what? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When had Frost Heaven's reputation fallen to such a degree? How about it? Wanna bet? Duan Hanshan asked hastily when Hong Xinyuan remained silent for some time. However, Hong Xinyuan wasn't a young and arrogant rookie. He didn't pay any attention to Duan Hanshan's goading at all. Instead, he turned to look at the honest-looking Tiancheng. Tiancheng, what do you think? Hong Xinyuan asked. Chapter 2698, Zero Wing's Hidden Strength? Upon hearing Hong Xinyuan's question, Kurue hurriedly signaled Tiancheng to agree. After all, this was an excellent opportunity to disrupt Mushin's plan. Tiancheng was the 5th strongest person among Frost Heaven's 10 swords. Out of everyone in Zero Wing, only Black Flame could possibly contend against him. However, Tiancheng surprisingly did not answer right away. Uncle Hong, may I use my full strength in the match? Tiancheng asked. The 10 swords were different from Frost Heaven's ordinary members. It was imperative that they conceal their strength from outsiders. Unless they received explicit orders from the upper echelon, they couldn't show their full power even if it meant suffering defeat. Tiancheng's question didn't surprise Duan Hanshan. After all, this was also the case with the Azure Chamber of Commerce. Only during the annual competition before did Solitary Frost and the others have their restrictions lifted. You can use your full strength when necessary, Hong Xinyuan said after giving the matter some thought. Zero Wing's Black Flame possessed the strength to contend against the mythic-ranked foe Saint Devourers. If Black Flame stepped forward as Zero Wing's representative, Tiancheng would undoubtedly lose if he held back his strength. Such an outcome wasn't what Hong Xinyuan wished to see. After all, his goal here today was to establish Frost Heaven's prestige. I don't have any problems then. Fighting spirit flared in Tiancheng's eyes. Good. I'll leave it to you then. Hong Xinyuan nodded in satisfaction. He then turned to Duan Hanshan and said, Old Ice Demon, we have a deal. Initially, Hong Xinyuan had been considering how to go about making Zero Wing aware of Frost Heaven's might after doing a brief inspection of Zero Wing's headquarters. Now, it would seem he could save his efforts. That settled. Duan Hanshan chuckled. He then turned to the blue-haired youth nearby and said, "Gu, step down for now. Let this kid take your place." Him. After scanning the honest-looking youth standing beside Duan Hanshan, Gu Han asked reluctantly, "Are you sure?" Immediately, both Tian Cheng and Hong Xinyuan had the urge to puke blood. Just how much were others underestimating Frost Heaven nowadays? However, Hong Xinyuan did not explode in anger. He merely signaled Tian Cheng with his eyes, conveying, "You know what to do." They would let the Azure Chamber of Commerce know just how powerful Frost Heaven was through this duel. After a while, the coaching battle between Zero Wing and the Azure Chamber of Commerce officially began. At this time, more people thronged the virtual combat platform. Whether it was Zero Wing's members or Azure's members, both were ecstatic. "I heard that a newcomer from Frost Heaven is taking Gu Han's place. I wonder how many seconds that newcomer can last." "I heard the best record so far is only 16 seconds. 16? In that case, Frost Heaven's newcomer should last 10 seconds. 10? Bullshit. I bet he won't last more than 6 or 7 seconds. The sudden substitution for the coaching battle sparked a heated discussion among the audience. In particular, Azure's members placed all their focus on guessing how many seconds Tian Cheng could last in the duel. This situation had Kurue gnashing her teeth and dumbfounded Mushin. Is it because Frost Heaven hasn't made any major movements recently? Is everyone treating us as pushovers already? Mushin felt that something was amiss as she eavesdropped on the discussions. The behavior of Azure's members was too strange. Every one of them spoke as if being able to last only several seconds against Zero Wing's representative was something to be proud of. None of them possessed the consciousness of an expert at all. After Tian Cheng sat within the virtual combat cabin, the door on the other side of the cabin slowly opened. A young and beautiful girl then walked in, sat on the battle seat directly opposite Tian Cheng, and gently donned the Link helmet. However, contrary to Tian Cheng's expectations, his opponent did not exude an expert's temperament and sharpness at all, the girl next door type. "Are you kidding me?" Anger immediately stirred in Tian Cheng's heart when he saw this girl. Initially, he thought that Zero Wing would send a great expert to fight him. He had even sought permission from Hong Xinyuan to use his full strength. However, not only did Zero Wing not send Black Flame to face him, but even the guild's 2 vice-guild leaders did not show up. Instead, it fielded a little girl. Zero Wing was thoroughly underestimating Frost Heaven. "Old Ice Demon, this is the guild you have high hopes for?" Hong Xinyuan chuckled involuntarily as he inspected Violet Cloud. After seeing Duan Hanshan's confidence, Hong Xinyuan had very nearly believed that there was more to Zero Wing than met the eye. However, given the current circumstances, it would seem he had been worried for nothing. Although Violet Cloud was indeed talented for reaching the Void Realm at such a young age, she was still way behind when compared to Tian Cheng. In fact, Tian Cheng should end the fight within seconds. Of course. Upon seeing the smile on Hong Xinyuan's face, Duan Hanshan similarly smiled and suggested, "Why don't we add to the wager, then?" "What? Are you regretting your decision?" Hong Xinyuan smiled. "No. In addition to the previous wager, how about we bet 100,000 magic crystals?" Duan Hanshan suggested happily. "What if I don't accept?" Hong Xinyuan asked. In Hong Xinyuan's opinion, Duan Hanshan was simply trying to scare him into canceling their bet. With the major update God's domain was undergoing, the prices of magic crystals and various materials were bound to increase. Hence, the various superpowers were currently doing their best to collect as much of these resources as possible. No one was willing to sell. Moreover, 100,000 magic crystals was a considerable sum, one even Hong Xinyuan wouldn't wager casually. "It doesn't matter if you refuse. It's up to you," Duan Hanshan said indifferently. "Okay, I'll bet with you," Hong Xinyuan agreed after seeing Duan Hanshan give up so readily. "But I knew you were a good person," Duan Hanshan chortled. "A good person?" Hong Xinyuan found Duan Hanshan's words strange. Beat Tins/B. Meanwhile, during their conversation, the holographic screen outside the combat cabin also displayed the battlefield Violet Cloud and Tianqing stood on. The battlefield was a barren wilderness, with the two players 100 yards apart from each other. Both of them retained their attributes, levels, and equipment from when they logged out of God's domain. At this time, Tianqing sported 6 pieces of epic equipment. The spear he held also gave off a dark glow and made the surrounding space tremble slightly, even while idle. With one glance, it was obvious that the spear was an extraordinary magic weapon with attributes that definitely surpassed those of ordinary epic weapons. As for Tianqing, he had already reached level 119. His level ranked at the top even among the entirety of God's domain. Hee, now you know how powerful our guild is, Kuei muttered. However, contrary to Kuei's expectations, the crowd outside the combat cabin didn't reveal any surprise or exclaim in shock, remaining remarkably calm. On the other hand, complicated feelings flashed in Mushin's eyes as she looked at the holographic screen. It was as if she had just seen something unbelievable. Kuei followed her elder sister's gaze. Violet Cloud, level 121. Violet Cloud was 2 levels higher than Tianqing. Level 121? Kuei was dumbfounded. Frost Heaven had mobilized all its resources to help Tianqing reach level 119. Yet, a cleric from Zero Wing was actually 2 levels above him. Inside the virtual combat space, Tianqing was also surprised. He never imagined that someone would surpass him in terms of levels, and by 2 levels at that. It seems you're quite capable. However, this level difference won't bring you any advantages, Tianqing said as he looked at Violet Cloud. On the other hand, fighting in such an open wilderness is a huge disadvantage for a magical class like yourself. You won't have any room for evasion. That might not be the case. Violet Cloud shook her head, disagreeing with Tianqing's opinion. Is that so? Let me see if you're right, then. After saying so, Tianqing suddenly charged at Violet Cloud, leaving behind an afterimage in his original location. Tier 3 skill, Shadow Thorn. Due to the virtual combat cabin's limitations, he couldn't replicate 100% of his strength in God's domain. However, his physique and basic attributes were the same as what he had in the game. While ordinary Tier 3 players might take some time to cross 100 yards, Tianqing boasted the Tier 3 hidden class Dragon Spear Warrior. In the blink of an eye, he appeared before Violet Cloud and thrust his spear at her. A flurry of spear images rained down on the cleric, every one of them distorting space. This attack was Tianqing's best technique, something even domain realm experts found challenging to receive. A combination of magic and martial arts? Duan Han immediately understood the underlying principles of Tianqing's technique, and he had to admit that the youth was indeed very talented. While Tianqing's technique might look like a series of simple thrusts, these attacks actually formed a magic array that allowed them to integrate into one. Tianqing's mana manipulation ability was simply inhuman. The power of his attack was definitely on par with mythic monsters of the same level. If this attack struck a magical class player, the result would undoubtedly be instant death. Just as Kuei felt proud of Tianqing's performance, a sigh entered her ears. That guy sure is brave. He actually entered melee range. He's dead for sure. Kuei quickly dismissed these words. After all, if not a melee, how should a melee player fight a magical class player? At range? Even a greenhorn wouldn't speak such nonsense. Defying Kuei and the others' expectations of a quick retreat and a counterattack once Tianqing's assault ended, Violet Cloud held her position. Moreover, she even took the initiative to meet Tianqing's attack. Just when the rain of spears was about to land, Violet Cloud swung her staff horizontally and raised her free hand to receive the fierce assault. Not only did this scene stun the spectators outside the combat cabin, but even Tianqing himself was puzzled. A magical class player trying to receive a melee player's attack without spells was simply suicide. However, when Violet Cloud's hand was about to come into contact with the spear images, a twofold magic array suddenly appeared on her palm. Tier 3 defensive spell, Amethyst Barrier. After summoning the Amethyst Barrier, Violet Cloud waved her hand once more, pushing out the crystalline barrier. The next moment, not only did the spear images scatter upon clashing with the amethyst barrier, but the barrier even continued pressing forward toward Tianqing, forcing the latter to dodge it. Tier 3 defensive spells can be used like that? Kurue was stunned when she saw Violet Cloud nullify Tianqing's attack. Defensive spells in God's domain were generally stationary, they couldn't be moved once cast. The main reason for this was the inhuman level of mana control required to execute such a complex feat. This was something beyond even domain realm experts, yet Violet Cloud had done it. Meanwhile, just as Tianqing dodged the amethyst barrier and was about to launch another attack on the cleric, he suddenly froze in shock. Over 300 magic blades had appeared around Violet Cloud, dancing around her like sprites. Every one of them carried enough power to decimate heaven and earth. Without giving Tianqing a chance to catch his breath, these magical sprites immediately shot at him. Double speed casting? Tianqing hurriedly executed a defensive combat technique while simultaneously activating a Tier 3 defensive skill. The next moment, a pitch-black phantom emerged from Tianqing's body and spread toward the oncoming magic blades. A series of explosions occurred in midair, the sound reverberating throughout the battlefield. The spatial fluctuations occurring were even visible on the virtual combat platform's holographic screen. Tianqing's defense could be said to be perfect. He had already reached consummate mastery over his domain. Every one of his actions had been simplified to the extreme, and they created an iron wall before him. 3 seconds later, a person's silhouette flew out of the dust veiling the battlefield and smashed into the ground. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. How is this possible? Kurue was stupefied when she identified this silhouette. After all, this person was none other than Tianqing. Chapter 2699. A foregone conclusion. I actually lost? Tianqing wore a dazed expression when he woke up back inside the combat cabin. For a time, his thoughts lingered on the final moment of the fight. What exactly happened to Tianqing? How did he get defeated so suddenly? Questions flooded Kurue's mind as she stared at the holographic screen. Tianqing was clearly holding his own against the magic blades a second ago. Yet, in the next second, he got devoured by them. This situation was like a nightmare. Tianqing had combined a bronze defensive combat technique with a Tier 3 defensive skill. Even Tier 4 mythic monsters couldn't have harmed him. How could a Tier 3 cleric like Violet Cloud possibly land an attack on him? However, unlike Kurue, none of the spectators around the Frost Heaven contingent were surprised by this situation. Azure's members, in particular, even felt that this was a reasonable outcome. She seized his mana. Mushin gasped deeply as she looked at Violet Cloud's figure displayed on the screen. Her control over mana is already at the Tier 4 standard. She has full control over the mana within her sphere of control, and players below Tier 3 cannot use mana to fight her. In God's domain, players would start learning how to manipulate mana after reaching Tier 2. And to advance to Tier 3, they had to construct a mana body, which allowed them to manipulate the ambient mana to power and enhance their skills and spells. However, if players couldn't utilize the ambient mana, then their skills and spells would be drastically weakened. In contrast, once a player's control over mana reached the Tier 4 standard, they could control all the mana within a 50-yard radius or more. And within this range, the skills and spells they used would far surpass that of ordinary Tier 3 players. With the combination of these two effects, even though Tianqing had vastly superior combat standards, he was still no match for Violet Cloud in terms of overall combat power. Realization dawned upon Kurue when she heard Mushin's explanation, and complicated emotions filled her heart as she looked at Violet Cloud. She's not much older than me, right? Kurue mumbled to herself. Could she be the incarnation of a Tier 4 NPC? Not only did Violet Cloud reach the Void Realm standard at such a young age, but her control over mana had also reached the Tier 4 standard. This was a feat that veteran domain realm experts had yet to accomplish. Hong Xinyuan, sitting beside Kurue, reacted surprisingly calmly to the duel's outcome. In fact, A hint of appreciation even appeared in his eyes as he looked at Violet Cloud. "Old Hong, you didn't lose unjustly, right?" Duan Hanshan asked as he stroked his beard. "It seems you figured me out long ago." Hong Xinyuan didn't get angry over losing 15 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid and 100,000 magic crystals. On the contrary, a smile even appeared on his face. Of course. Any well-informed superpower could find out about that matter. Duan Hanshan nodded. "You didn't lose for nothing this time. You should know that Elder Sinful Flame lost to this young lady in our internal competition. You should be laughing at your harvest." However, what Duan Hanshan didn't know was that the current Violet Cloud was much stronger than when she fought against Sinful Flame. This time, she didn't rely on her staff to raise her concentration to the Tier 4 standard. Instead, she had reached Tier 4 by relying on herself. In other words, her mana control had improved by a significant margin. Yes, this is a worthwhile loss. Hong Xinyuan also couldn't help smiling at Duan Hanshan's words. This trip wasn't in vain after all. "Uncle Hong." Hong Xinyuan's happy reaction confused Kuei. That was 15 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid and 100,000 magic crystals they were talking about. This was a significant sum, even for Frost Heaven. "That's right. This is a worthwhile loss." Mushin also smiled. Frost Heaven's operation this time was of utmost importance. It might even affect the situation of God's domain. It was naturally better for the foreign aid they requested to be as strong as possible. Although Tiancheng couldn't display his full strength with the virtual combat platform, the abilities Violet Cloud had revealed thus far were already more than enough to qualify her as a capable helper. "Mushin, you did a good job this time," Hong Xinyuan praised Mushin. "I am only trying to help the guild." Mushin smiled in delight. It wasn't easy to earn Hong Xinyuan's praise. "Afterward, notify Black Flame that I will give Zero Wing 20 slots for our secret operation. Also, aside from the 100 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid, the Boulder Corporation will also give Zero Wing 3 slots to enter the upper zone if the operation succeeds," Hong Xinyuan said, smiling. "Uncle Hong." Mushin was shocked. For a moment, she even thought her ears were playing tricks on her. "Uncle Hong, aren't you giving too much?" Kuei's eyes were also wide with shock. She wondered whether Hong Xinyuan had lost his mind. Zero Wing was an outsider. Giving the guild some items and credits should already be more than enough. Yet Hong Xinyuan was actually offering those precious slots as remuneration. If the corporation's Grand Elders were to learn of this, they would definitely jump in shock. After all, many of these Grand Elders' children and grandchildren didn't even get those slots. "How generous of you, Old Hong. If I remember correctly, you shouldn't have that many reserved slots in hand, right?" Duan Hanshan was also astonished by Hong Xinyuan's decision. To ordinary people, entering the upper zone was but a dream. To the wealthy, this name was something they all desired. The upper zone was a special region the Green God Company had constructed, and only select megacities had it. In total, there were fewer than 60 upper zones worldwide. Meanwhile, the main reason why countless wealthy people sought to enter the upper zone was longevity and youth. According to statistics gathered 50 years ago, the average life expectancy of people living in the upper zones had already reached 130 years. In addition, residents could remain in their prime up to 80 years old. In other words, an 80-year-old person living in an upper zone could be as physically fit as a 50-year-old person living in the outside world. And this was only the statistics from 50 years ago. The upper zones offered many other benefits. However, only residents would know what these benefits were. Meanwhile, the number of people allowed to enter the upper zones every year was limited. Moreover, one wouldn't necessarily be able to enter an upper zone just by having money. One also needed to meet certain conditions. Of course, the Green God Company would also reserve a number of slots for the international corporations that were its partners. However, this number was so incredibly small that these corporations couldn't bear giving any of their slots to outsiders. Only those who had made great contributions could receive a slot. For Hong Xinyuan to offer 3 slots to Zero Wing was an unreasonably generous move. I can still afford to give away 3 slots, Hong Xinyuan said, clicking his tongue. However, while he pretended not to care very much, the distress in his eyes couldn't escape any of the experts present. It seems you have it tough as well, Duan Hanshan said as he gave Hong Xinyuan a complicated look. Of those present, only he knew of some of the reasons behind Hong Xinyuan's decision. However, Duan Hanshan's words bewildered Mushin and Kuri. All right, our goal has been achieved. We should go now. Hong Xinyuan chuckled without giving an explanation. He then turned around and walked out of the lobby, showing no intention of staying even a moment longer. After Hong Xinyuan's group left, Gu Han, who was standing some distance away, approached Duan Hanshan. Elder Duan, why did Frost Heaven pay Zero Wing a visit this time? Gu Han asked out of curiosity. It's nothing important. Duan Hanshan took a deep breath, complex emotions darkening his eyes as he watched Hong Xinyuan's group exit the building. It's just that a big change is imminent, and the time you youngsters have is dwindling. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. A big change? Gu Han grew even more confused at Duan Hanshan's words. Just as Gu Han was about to ask more questions, Liang Jing walked out of an elevator and approached them. Elder Duan, our guild leader would like to see you, Liang Jing said respectfully. It seems your guild leader finally decided to come out. He really kept this old man waiting. Nodding, Duan Hanshan continued, it just so happens I want to talk to him about the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Lead the way. This way, please, Elder Duan. Liang Jing led Duan Hanshan to the express elevator to the building's top floor. Chapter 2700, Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Disappearance. Zero Wing Tower, top floor reception room. Shifeng, meeting you truly isn't easy. This old man has waited 2 whole days, Duan Hanshan said facetiously as he took a sip of tea on the sofa. Despite Duan Hanshan's jocular words, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes as he looked at Shifeng. He could feel something different about Shifeng, yet he couldn't put his finger on it at the moment. In God's domain, Shifeng felt like a vast ocean. Now, although he still gave off a calm and vast feeling, Duan Hanshan could also feel hints of wind and rain coming from the youth. It was as if this calm could explode at any moment. In fact, Duan Hanshan could even feel a faint trace of danger from Shifeng right now. However, this feeling was intermittent, leaving Duan Hanshan uncertain. Shifeng himself didn't notice this change. After completing his Tier 4 promotion and exiting his virtual gaming cabin, he only felt that his thoughts had become sharper and nothing more. This situation also puzzled Shifeng somewhat. Unlike the previous breakthroughs he had, his body didn't become deprived of energy because of the breakthrough. On the contrary, his current physical condition was surprisingly good. He had not entered a state of weakness after this breakthrough. Elder Duan, you jest. I truly had to go to great lengths to get out of God's domain, Shifeng explained. May I know why you decided to visit Zero Wing's headquarters personally this time? Did something big happen? Duan Hanshan was the Duan family's representative in the Azure Chamber of Commerce. His status was not the slightest bit inferior to that of the guild leaders of super first-rate guilds. No matter how one looked at it, there was no way someone of such status would escort a bunch of newcomers for training. This was especially true for Azure, a superpower that focused on commerce. Azure was much busier than combat-oriented guilds, as it had to maintain a vast and accurate information network. You really are a straightforward person. You behave nothing like the guild leaders of other powers. Duan Hanshan chuckled. However, I am similar to you in this aspect. In that case, I'll get straight to the point. Indeed, I didn't come here for the training meeting but another major event. This matter might even have something to do with Zero Wing. A major event that concerns Zero Wing? Shifeng couldn't help growing curious. May I know what this event is, Elder Duan? If even an individual like Duan Hanshan spoke of this matter as a major event, then it had to involve the various superpowers. However, based on what he heard from Liang Jing, aside from the system update, there shouldn't be any other major events in God's domain recently. You should be aware of what happened to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, right? Duan Hanshan asked. Yes. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 3 pavilion masters disappeared together with their close aides, and there has been no news of them even now, Shi Feng replied, nodding. The 3 pavilion masters' disappearance had caused an uproar among the various superpowers. He had also asked Mu Lingsha to inquire into the situation, but she still hadn't discovered anything thus far. The matter I spoke of is somewhat related to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, Duan Hanshan said, his expression growing serious. 2 days ago, the guild leader and vice-guild leaders of the 9-star family all disappeared. The 9-star family's leadership disappeared? How is this possible? Shi Feng was stunned by the news. Not only was the 9-star family a super first-rate guild, but its background was even stronger than the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions. According to rumors, the guild had suddenly gained the support of a powerful corporation. It currently occupied a portion of several empires and was close to catching up with Silenc. Moreover, the 9-star family had 6 vice-guild leaders, who independently managed the guild branches in different empires. The fact that all of them had disappeared overnight was even more unbelievable than the simultaneous disappearance of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 3 pavilion masters. As for the possibility of someone attacking the 9-star family's headquarters, that was even more impossible. After all, powers of such caliber possessed comprehensive security systems. Even several Grandmaster martial artists shouldn't be able to kidnap these people in secret. News of this matter has been blocked. Not many superpowers know of it, Duan Hanshan said in a quiet tone. What does this have to do with Zero Wing? Shi Feng grew even more curious after hearing Duan Hanshan's words. Could the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion have a hand in this matter? No. Duan Hanshan shook his head. According to Azure's investigations, both the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions and 9-star family's leaders disappeared after secretly meeting with Saint's Hand. And according to inside information from the 9-star family, after the guild's leaders disappeared from the game, a group of mysterious people took their gaming cabins away. A group of mysterious people took their gaming cabins? Is this Saint's Hand's doing? After hearing Duan Hanshan's explanation, Shi Feng suspected that the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had faced a similar situation. Also, did you find out where their cabins were transported to? While we still don't know if this incident is related to that mysterious bunch in God's domain, we did find out where the cabins were transported to, Duan Hanshan replied, chuckling. Where? Shi Feng asked curiously. Logically, with the forces the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and 9-star family wielded, the 2 guilds should have been able to locate their leaders quickly. However, even now, there was no news from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. This was truly a bizarre situation. The zone. Duan Hanshan said these words one by one. The upper zone? The fog enveloping Shi Feng's heart grew heavy. He simply couldn't understand what was going on. Phoenix Rain was merely one of the leaders of a super first-rate guild. Why would someone of her status be dragged into such a huge incident? Shi Feng knew a little about the upper zone. It was a special region capable of extending the lifespan of its residents. However, not just any wealthy person could enter it. In the eyes of the upper zone's residents, ordinary corporations were no different from ants. Even the leaders of the major corporations backing the Azure Chamber of Commerce would have to maintain a low profile while inside the upper zone, all the more someone like Phoenix Rain. It wouldn't be far-fetched to say that there shouldn't be any relations between Phoenix Rain and the upper zone. Saint's Hand is deeply involved in this matter. I came here this time to tell you that it's best not to provoke Saint's Hand too much during this time. Who knows? Zero Wing might end up becoming the next 9-star family, Duan Hanshan warned earnestly. Provoke Saint's Hand? Revealing a bitter smile, Shi Feng said, I've never taken the initiative to provoke them. To occupy the Orc Empire, Saint's Hand had already set its sights on Silverwing Town. It wasn't that he wanted to provoke Saint's Hand. Rather, the other party had already resolved to take his life. However, you don't have to worry too much about this either, Duan Hanshan said, chuckling. Don't need to worry? Shi Feng asked, puzzled. Although he had adequate strength now, he was certain the security of Zero Wing's headquarters was far from comparable to that of the 9-star families and Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's headquarters. Frost Heaven's Hong Xinyuan has promised that so long as Zero Wing helps Frost Heaven complete the task you two agreed on, he will give Zero Wing 3 reserved slots to enter the upper zone, Duan Hanshan said, smiling. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Any superpower would laugh to death if they received such a wonderful opportunity. You should know how extraordinary the upper zones are. Those places are possibly the safest locations in the world. Although both the 9-Star Family and Dragon Phoenix Pavilion were super first-rate guilds, the corporations backing them lacked the power to secure slots to enter the upper zone for the guild's leadership. Otherwise, the two guilds wouldn't have faced such a predicament. This piece of news rendered Shifeng speechless. Just what is Frost Heaven trying to do for it to be so generous? These were reserved slots for the upper zone they were talking about. All else aside, just the upper zone security aspect was already more than enough to make the various superpowers guild leaders go crazy. During his previous life, even when the guild leaders of first-rate guilds offered billions of credits, they still couldn't secure a slot in the upper zone. Only the guild leaders of super first-rate guilds could barely manage to do so. Yet now, Frost Heaven was actually offering 3 slots to Zero Wing. At this moment, Shifeng wouldn't be surprised if Frost Heaven wanted Zero Wing to mount a full-on assault on the 5 great super guilds. You're quite lucky, honestly. If it were any other time, Frost Heaven most likely wouldn't offer such a price for Zero Wing's help, Duan Hanshan said, sighing. As for what exactly Frost Heaven wants Zero Wing to do, I can't reveal it to you now. Someone from Frost Heaven will notify you when the time comes. In any case, it isn't a simple task. Zero Wing has to be careful. Otherwise, it wouldn't be surprising if Zero Wing were to perish. Thank you for your reminder, Elder Duan. Shifeng sincerely thanked Duan Hanshan. Duan Hanshan's willingness to reveal the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions and Saints' Hands matters to him already demonstrated Azure's sincerity in its partnership with Zero Wing. Shifeng naturally had to show his appreciation. Azure hasn't done anything noteworthy. How you'll proceed in the future is still up to you to decide, Duan Hanshan said, chuckling. Seeing as Shifeng was willing to accept the Azure Chamber of Commerce's kindness, his task here was done. Alright, I should go now. After saying so, Duan Hanshan left the reception room. He didn't even let Shifeng send him off as he silently disappeared from Zero Wing's headquarters. Guild leader, what should we do now? Liang Jing asked worriedly after Duan Hanshan left. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Saint's Hand posed too much of a threat. If they didn't act carefully, they might very well end up like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and 9-Star Family. We can only take things as they come, Shifeng said. However, we'll have to reorganize our plans. Once God's Domain system update ends, have all of Zero Wing's main force members gather at Silverwing City. It's about time Zero Wing underwent some changes. God's Domain's major updates were extraordinary, each triggering a complete shift in the game's structure. Since the first major update came a little sooner than expected, he would have to start overhauling Zero Wing's expansion plans. Otherwise, the guild wouldn't even have scraps to fight over, let alone contending against Saint's Hand and the various superpowers. I understand. I'll get it done as soon as I go online, Liang Jing said, nodding. Time passed quickly. Before anyone knew it, God's Domain's major update had been completed, and everyone started logging back into the game at 7 o'clock in the morning. Lying in his virtual gaming cabin, Shifeng took a deep breath when he saw the login button appear on the screen before him. Login. Chapter 27:01 Era of Hegemony begins. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residence. Along with a flash of brilliance in the underground secret room, Shifeng's figure gradually appeared. Unlike the previous times he had logged into God's Domain, Shifeng now felt a little dizzy, the dizziness lasting for several seconds. And when he recovered, he found that everything in front of him seemed completely different. If the previous God's Domain looked like an extremely high-definition image in Shifeng's eyes, then the current God's Domain looked like the real thing. In other words, the sense of reality he got from the game was on a completely different level. This kind of realism is so nostalgic. A smile appeared on Shifeng's face when he perceived his current situation. Most players wouldn't notice any significant changes in the game's realism after the major update. However, for Shifeng, who had fought in God's domain for 10 years in his previous life, the changes were distinct. Previously, he constantly felt as if there was a barrier between his body and brain. He couldn't control his virtual body as easily as he did his real body no matter what. However, this barrier was now gone. It was like the difference between 99% and 100%. This kind of change might not mean anything to ordinary players, but the difference was massive for expert players. Take humans and gorillas, for example. Despite there being only a 1% genetic difference, the two were worlds apart. Combat in God's domain was different from combat in the real world. Due to physical limitations, there were many techniques the human body could not exhibit in the real world. Take a child trying to lift a 1-ton sword, for example. With how tiny the child's physique was, such a feat would be impossible. However, what if the child's physique allowed him to swing the sword easily? One could easily imagine how terrifying the child's destructive power would be. After adjusting to the changes, Shifeng left the secret room, heading to his office to sort out the information on the major update. When Shifeng walked out of the secret room, the Tier 3 NPC guard stationed at its entrance panicked. Like a frightened rabbit, the guard hurriedly straightened his back and put on a respectful look. "Good morning, my lord." The Tier 3 NPC respectfully saluted Shifeng. "Good morning." Shifeng nodded and smiled at the NPC named Flet. "It's finally here. I wonder how chaotic God's domain's major forces will become?" In reality, the biggest change brought about by God's domain's first major update wasn't in the realism but the NPCs and monsters. Both NPCs and monsters gained their own thoughts after the major update. Yes, thoughts, not intelligence. The so-called AI that powered the NPCs and monsters before was merely a well-designed program that could react to players' words and actions to a reasonable extent. Most of the NPCs and monsters in the game couldn't actually think for themselves. Generally, only NPCs at Tier 5 and above had such an ability. But now, no matter how weak the monster or NPC was, they would all have their own thoughts. This would bring about a great change to God's domain. After all, from a certain perspective, NPCs and monsters were no longer different from real humans. With this change, fights with monsters and NPCs would feel no different from PvP fights. To be precise, fights against monsters and NPCs would become even more troublesome than PvP fights. Unlike players, monsters and NPCs were accustomed to fighting in God's domain. Some monsters and individual NPCs had started fighting at birth and accumulated 10, 20, 30 years or more of experience. Their combat experience far exceeded that of ordinary players that had been in God's domain for only 1 or 2 years. However, this still wasn't the greatest impact on God's domain's players. What would really affect players were the changes in the behavior of NPCs and monsters. From now on, NPCs would not only actively hunt monsters but also compete with players for various quests and resources at the Adventurers Association. They would even contest for the precious resources and opportunities needed for class promotions. When the first major update hit God's domain in the past, this change had given the various powers a huge headache. After all, not only had they lost their monopoly on resources, but NPCs and monsters had even stolen a significant portion of these resources. Of course, this change came with its benefits as well. For example, players unaffiliated with any powers could choose to join NPC teams to do quests. This option instantly increased the survivability of independent players. It also allowed independent players to get their hands on resources and equipment that were previously unattainable. Meanwhile, after Shifeng left the underground hall, the NPC named Fret breathed out a deep sigh of relief. "The Lord seems strange today. He normally doesn't talk to us guards, yet he actually said good morning to me today." Fret, who was clad in silver mail armor, thought in confusion as he looked at Shifeng's departing back. Did the Lord notice me slacking, so he greeted me as a warning? Thinking up to this point, Fret shivered involuntarily. This won't do. I mustn't slack off anymore. Such a good job is hard to find in the entire Star Moon Kingdom. If I lose it, those former colleagues of mine will definitely treat me as a joke. Fret raised his vigilance and straightened his posture even further. Meanwhile, when the other NPC guards in the underground hall saw Shifeng, they also started secretly discussing Shifeng's peculiar behavior today. Shifeng was someone standing in a lofty position. In the past, he normally wouldn't even say a word to them. He was basically the representation of coldness and ruthlessness. Yet, Shifeng gave off the feeling of a spring breeze today. This sudden transformation made the guards in the underground hall uneasy for some time. At this time, these NPCs weren't the only ones feeling doubtful and insecure. The players throughout God's domain also felt surprised and confused by the changes to the game. The forums of God's domain were also burning with discussions. Why do those NPCs feel like living people? They're even discussing us players in private. What is going on here? You think that's strange? My personal guard actually asked for a day off to take care of his injured wife. You guys probably haven't been to the Adventurers Association yet, right? Right now, NPCs are taking on the quests posted there. One NPC even seduced the beauty in my party to go questing with him. For a while, the players of God's domain were bewildered by these changes to the NPCs. Some found the changes novel, while others found them flabbergasting. However, most players rejoiced at these changes. Such sentient NPCs were simply unheard of. The players felt as if they had actually come to another world. This was especially true when they heard these NPCs discussing them. The NPCs would even rave about the experts among players. Some well-known expert players even had fans among the NPCs, a situation ordinary players couldn't help envying. However, unlike ordinary players, God's domain's various major powers were far less delighted at these changes. In fact, these sudden changes were practically fatal to some of the smaller guilds. This was because the major update didn't just grant NPCs their own thoughts. The monsters out in the fields had also become much more troublesome to handle. This was especially true for monsters at the Lord rank or above. The wealth of combat experience they possessed made them even stronger than experts in terms of combat standards. A Lord-ranked monster could easily pummel a Tier 2 expert of the same level. Some great lords could even contend against Tier 3 experts. However, this still wasn't the worst part. The truly terrible change the major update brought was the removal of fixed dungeons. Dungeons were a stable source of equipment and materials for the various major powers in God's domain. Quite a number of guilds would grind low-level dungeons for all sorts of materials rather than raid high-level dungeons. In fact, small guilds weren't the only ones to use this approach to secure materials. Even the various superpowers did so. After all, with the difficulty of high-level dungeons, raiding them would definitely result in casualties, which would, in turn, cause the players in the team to regress. Hence, the various superpowers took the more conservative approach to obtain materials. They would have only one vanguard team for raiding high-difficulty dungeons. That way, they could ensure that they possessed the latest and best equipment and materials available while simultaneously having a large amount of basic materials to supply the vanguard team. However, that all changed with the game's major update. After the update, all the fixed dungeons had disappeared. Now, only dungeons that appeared at random were available. Meanwhile, some of these dungeons were challenging, while some were a walk in the park. Moreover, every one of these dungeons could be raided only once before they disappeared. If one didn't raid the dungeon upon discovering it, there was a high chance someone else would raid it first. This change dumbfounded not only the various small guilds but even the superpowers. With this situation, how were they supposed to develop their guilds from now on? Similarly, the various adventurer teams in God's domain also started growing uneasy. Not only did resources grow scarcer, but NPCs had even emerged as competitors. One could easily imagine how intense the fight for resources would become in the future. The various superpowers might even remove their disguises and start fighting and competing for real. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residence, Guild Leader's office. Guild Leader, everyone's arrived, Liang Jing reported as she looked at Shifeng, who was arranging the latest information on God's domain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Are Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow also here? Shifeng asked. Although Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had already exited the space-time maze, as they were transported to a special location, they couldn't contact others through the game at all. They could only contact others through the real world. They're here, but hesitation appeared on Liang Jing's face. Puzzled, Shifeng asked, but what? Tentatively, Liang Jing whispered, I might be mistaken, but when I saw them just now, they felt alien. Chapter 2702, Silence, Alien? Shifeng failed to comprehend Liang Jing's words for a moment. As his assistant, Liang Jing didn't just take care of affairs in Zero Wing's headquarters. Normally, she would also help Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose with tasks in God's domain. Hence, she had frequent contact with the two vice guild leaders. In fact, Liang Jing should be even more familiar with them than he was. Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had been absent from the guild for only some weeks. No matter how he looked at it, Liang Jing shouldn't have a reason to describe them as alien. Are you saying that their temperament has changed? Shifeng asked after giving the matter some thought. A person's temperament would change along with the improvement of their knowledge and mental state, especially after a breakthrough in the limit of their brain activity. Shifeng was a perfect example of this. No. Shaking her head, Liang Jing whispered in a somewhat uncomfortable voice, that kind of feeling. It's like looking at complete strangers wearing their faces. Wearing their faces? Liang Jing's words surprised Shifeng. Are you sure? I'm very sure. Liang Jing said earnestly. Okay. Shifeng nodded solemnly. This matter ends here. Just treat them like you normally do. Guild leader, are the vice guild leaders all right? Liang Jing asked worriedly. No matter how she looked at it, this change simply wasn't normal. If Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose really had a problem, Zero Wing would be in great danger. After all, the two vice guild leaders were responsible for most of the guild's daily activities, whereas Shifeng was mainly a figurehead. I'm not sure yet. Shifeng shook his head. I'm afraid I'll know what's going on only after I meet with them in person. Space-time mazes were very special existences in God's domain. Only an extremely small number of players would encounter a space-time maze when traveling through space-time passages. An even smaller number of players would encounter a mysterious space after leaving the space-time maze. This mysterious space was unresolvable. Many people attributed its appearance to a bug in the game. Every player that entered this mysterious space would end up in a very special world. Nobody knew what kind of world it was, and only one thing existed in this world. Slaughter. One would either be hunted down endlessly, or hunt others endlessly, or fight on an endless battlefield. It was as if the fragments of countless memories in God's domain were collected in this special world. Even when players were killed in this world, they wouldn't truly die. They would only go from one dream to another after their deaths, and this cycle would loop endlessly. Moreover, the pain players felt in this world wasn't mitigated in the slightest. The concept of time in this world was supposedly blurred. The time players experienced inside this world was something only their minds perceived, with no effect on their real bodies. Hence, even when a player spent 1 or 5 years inside this special world, only hours or days might have passed in the real world. However, time was the scariest thing in existence. After all, time could wear down everything, let alone humans. If Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose really came out from this mysterious space, a lot of time must have passed for them already, so much so that even their memories had blurred. Hence, it was only normal for them to change. The only thing Shifeng didn't know was how many years Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had spent in that mysterious space. Meanwhile, according to the statistics from his previous life, the longer the time one spent in that special world, the greater the influence on one's mentality. Zero Wing Residence's top-floor conference room. Zero Wing's upper echelon and core team leaders were currently seated inside this magnificent conference room. Of these people, even the weakest was a level 116, tier 3 player, while the strongest were Violet Cloud and Fire Dance, who had both reached level 121 already. However, there was still a significant gap between them and Feng, who was level 125. Fire Dance had already replaced her old gear with a set of dark red leather armor. Based on the magic patterns etched into her armor, the armor was a set. Moreover, it even gave off the glow effect unique to epic items. Fire Dance also had her hair tied up with a ribbon that resembled the starry sky. The ribbon gave her an indescribable sense of fierceness, as if she were the empress of the night sky. It seems Fire Dance also reaped a considerable harvest in the space-time maze. Feng was slightly surprised at the dagger hanging by Fire Dance's waist. Not only did the dagger exude a faint sense of hostility, but it even roiled the ambient mana. If this dagger were unsheathed, he couldn't even begin to imagine the impact it would have on the environment. Even fragmented legendary items paled in comparison to this dagger. However, when Feng swept his gaze across Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, who sat on both sides of the conference table, he was taken aback. How can this be? Feng was rendered speechless. After what Liang Jing had said, he had already mentally prepared himself for the worst. However, now that he saw them in person, he realized that the two's situation exceeded his worst expectations. Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's weapons and equipment remained the same as when they left the Western continent. Even their levels were still at level 117. However, the feeling the two gave off was utterly different. Gentle Snow had been rather aloof in the past but still relatively sociable. On the other hand, Aqua Rose had been a cheerful and assertive woman, and her eyes had always sparkled with wisdom and ambition. Now, however, the two of them could no longer be considered human. Neither of them exuded the slightest hint of emotion, as if they were plants. They did not appear happy or sad. Although they were currently communicating with the others around them, their voices did not fluctuate with any emotion whatsoever. The only thing Feng could sense from the two was a deathly silence, although the feeling of silence each gave off was slightly different. In the case of Gentle Snow, her silence resembled bones piled atop a battlefield. In the case of Aqua Rose, her silence was like a candle flame in the dark, carrying both death and hope. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Besides Feng, everyone else inside the room also sensed the changes in Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. If not for the Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose they retained in their memories, everyone might have even had the urge to flee the scene immediately. Guild leader, did something happen to the two vice guild leaders? Yulan asked Feng through a whisper. The change to Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose might not be noteworthy for those unfamiliar with them. But for those who were, this change was simply terrifying and creepy. Given how they are now, it seems something must have happened, Feng answered, not hiding the truth. After all, this was obvious to everyone present. During the time Zero Wings members were secretly discussing Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's changes, Feng also shifted his gaze to the two of them. How long did you two live in that world? Feng asked them through a whisper. Chapter 2703, 80 years. Feng's words were like a drop of water falling into a silent ocean. Although it couldn't kick up any huge waves, it still caused ripples that spread out endlessly. As soon as Feng finished voicing his inquiry, a hint of surprise flashed across Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's calm eyes. This surprise contained neither excitement nor joy. They didn't feel as if they found someone that understood them, either. They simply felt a little surprised. They wondered why Feng would know of this matter. However, their surprise soon disappeared, and darkness and calmness returned to their eyes. Afterward, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow exchanged glances. Aqua Rose then turned to Feng, an indifferent smile forming on her beautiful face. Sure enough, nothing can get past you, guild leader. We aren't sure how long we lived in that world. However, according to our calculations, it should be 80 years. 80 years? Feng couldn't help but gasp. Even his mind had gone slightly numb. He had thought of the possibility of Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow living in that special world for a considerable period. He had even considered the possibility of them living there for a decade or two. But 80 years? Many people lived only 80 years in their lifetimes. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had spent 80 years fighting ceaselessly every day. The mere thought was chilling. To spend 80 years alone. Just the loneliness alone was already unimaginable. Any normal person would have most likely gone crazy already. However, Aqua Rose's voice was incomparably calm, so calm that it was like she was talking about someone else's problem. 80 years. Complex emotions filled Shifeng's eyes as he quietly observed Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. It's no wonder you two feel like monsters. The moment he laid eyes on Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, he could already tell that the two of them were no longer human. After listening to Aqua Rose's explanation, he understood everything. If the two of them had spent 80 years in endless slaughter and combat, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were the strongest in the world in combat experience. Compared to them, the 10 years of combat experience he had in God's domain was nothing. Not to mention, both of them were combat geniuses. At this time, in terms of combat power, he was most likely a baby in front of Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. A baby trying to see through the thoughts and standards of an adult was simply a joke. Not to mention, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow would be adults even among Grandmaster martial artists. This situation placed Shifeng at a loss. He didn't know whether he should feel happy or helpless. Guild leader, Frost Heaven's Mushin just contacted us. While Shifeng was in a daze, Liang Jing, who stood beside him, suddenly spoke up. Mushin wants Zero Wing to gather at the Fire Dragon Empire's imperial capital. She says we are allowed to bring at most 20 people. It seems they're finally ready to act. Shifeng didn't feel particularly surprised at this piece of news. After all, Duan Hanshan had already said that Frost Heaven would soon take action. Did she tell you their plan? She did. Liang Jing nodded with a slightly gloomy face. Guild leader, are we really going to participate in Frost Heaven's operation this time? If possible, I wouldn't want to either. However, Frost Heaven's offer is too tempting to refuse, Shifeng said with a bitter smile. 3 reserved slots for the upper zone. This wasn't an opportunity one could come across every day. Even the various superpowers would pounce on it. Not to mention, the upper zone had an important benefit he needed. While Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose might have gained 80 years of combat experience in that special world and achieved inhuman levels of combat standards, these benefits came with a huge drawback. On the surface, it would seem as if the two had lived in that special world for 80 years. However, only weeks had gone by in the real world. The instant the two left that special world, it would be as if 80 years of memories had been downloaded into their brains, placing an unimaginable burden on both their brains and bodies. During his previous life, the players that lived in that special world for 2 or 3 years had gradually had problems with their bodies after they returned. Eventually, they became paralyzed and had to be hospitalized for a month before they recovered. After all, digesting all these memories had consumed a lot of their mental strength, which definitely wasn't a good thing. Meanwhile, both Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had lived in that special world for 80 years. Shifeng didn't dare imagine how massive a backlash they would suffer. For the two's safety, he had to bring them to the upper zone. Although the S-rank nutrient fluid had great recovery effects on the human body, it only helped a little in healing a person's brain and spirit. Only medicines for brain and spirit recovery could resolve this problem. Of all the medicines Shifeng knew, even the life potion wasn't particularly effective in spirit recovery. The most the life potion could do was restore ordinary depletions of mental strength. It was utterly ineffective against a brain overload like this. The only solution he could think of now was the upper zone. The upper zone was a special region the Green God Company constructed. There were plenty of unknowns inside. In fact, the precious S-rank nutrient fluids and life potions circulating in the market were merely obsolete medicine the Green God Company produced. Guild leader, Frost Heaven is too ambitious, Liang Jing commented despite herself. If we're not careful, Zero Wing might very well perish. What are they planning to do? Shifeng asked curiously. Their goal this time is to become one of the 12 great guilds of God's domain, Liang Jing said. The 12 Great Guilds wasn't a random title made up by players. Instead, this was a title given to the 12 strongest guilds recognized by the War God's Temple. The player guilds that become God's domain's 12 great guilds would enjoy numerous benefits across the main continent. They could even garrison an empire and be worshipped by the said empire. An empire's worship. Just this point alone was more than enough to allow a guild to pull ahead of the other superpowers. One could say that the position of the 12 great guilds was something all superpowers had to compete for. However, competing for this position wasn't an easy task. A guild had to satisfy a series of conditions to qualify. Firstly, guilds had to become one of the top 10 rookie guilds. After that, they had to compete for the 12 reserve seats of the 12 great guilds. However, this was going to be God's domain's first competition for the reserve seats. The War God's Temple had announced that 6 were empty this year. Hence, for this year only, player guilds could compete for the 6 empty reserve seats so long as they met the conditions for participation in the competition. Due to Zero Wing's poor foundation, Shifeng never even considered participating in the competition. There were 4 conditions for participation. 1. Submit 2,000 units of 7 Luminaries crystal to the War God's Temple. 2. Have a guild residence in the capital cities of 50 kingdoms and 12 empires. Simultaneously, the registering guild must also have the status of a 4-star guild. 3. Have over 1,000 Tier 3 players in the guild. 4. Have 30 guild cities under the guild's name. These 4 basic conditions were extremely harsh. Ordinary guilds shouldn't even dream of participating in the competition. In fact, even ordinary superpowers wouldn't qualify. Only the exceptionally strong superpowers could just barely meet the conditions. According to the information Zero Wing obtained from the secret pavilion, close to 20 super first-rate guilds and super guilds would participate in the competition for the reserve seats, every one of them a titan in the virtual gaming industry. One could easily imagine how intense the competition would be. No wonder Frost Heaven made such a lucrative offer. Realization also dawned upon Shifeng. In his previous life, Frost Heaven had first entered the ranks of top 10 rookie guilds and eventually became one of the 12 reserve guilds before slowly climbing up to join the 12 great guilds. However, Frost Heaven was not fully developed at this time. Trying to compete for one of the reserve seats so soon would most likely result in failure. Frost Heaven had to know this as well but was still grasping at a strand of hope. Guild leader, if we become Frost Heaven's foreign aid, any guild Frost Heaven confronts will probably treat us as a mortal enemy, Liang Jing explained. The position of the 12 reserve seats was a throne built atop countless bones. At present, Zero Wing was in a very terrible situation already. On one side there was Starlink. On the other side, there were the newly developed superpowers. There was even the extremely dangerous Saint's Hand in the Orc Empire. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. If they offended a few more superpowers now, Zero Wing would no longer have a future in God's domain. Although it is very dangerous, this is also a chance for Zero Wing. It would be a shame to let it go, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Fire Dance and the others should get ready. We'll set out immediately. While contesting for the 12 reserve seats was indeed dangerous, if they succeeded, even as foreign aid, Zero Wing would receive the War God's Temple's recognition as well as some basic privileges. For example, city garrison rights and worship rights. While getting an entire country to worship Zero Wing was impossible, getting one city to do so was still possible. This was also why many guilds had fought to become foreign aid for the participating guilds in the past. Chapter 2704, Maddening Start. Fire Dragon Empire, Flame Dragon City. Groups of players in black cloaks walked through the crowded commercial district of the imperial capital. What's going on? Why are there so many cloaked players on the streets today? Moreover, every one of them is so strong. A level 56, Tier 1 player, who came to the commercial district to upgrade his equipment, exclaimed in surprise when he saw the procession of cloaked players. Although Flame Dragon City was normally crowded with players, today's foot traffic was much more exaggerated than usual. Moreover, not only was the foot traffic triple the regular volume, but many of these new arrivals also gave off a strange vibe. In fact, players weren't the only ones wearing black cloaks. There were plenty of cloaked NPCs walking through the city as well, and every one of them radiated a terrifying aura. Although the city's resident NPCs were holding private discussions over this change, now that NPCs could think for themselves, they were deliberately avoiding players while discussing. This is normal. You've just started playing 5 Domain recently, so you might not know this, but today is the competition for the reserve seats of God's Domain's 12 Great Guilds, a level 109, Tier 3 man explained to the newcomer of his guild. God's Domain's 12 Great Guilds? The rookie shield warrior was surprised at his senior's words. Isn't that something determined by the Virtual Gaming Association? In the real world, the Virtual Gaming Association determined the publicly recognized super guilds annually. These positions were mostly fixed, very few changes would occur every year. No. This event is hosted by the War Gods Temple to determine God's Domain's 12 strongest guilds. It isn't a competition hosted in the real world, the Tier 3 man explained, chuckling. Does our guild have a chance to participate too? The rookie shield warrior asked, a hint of fighting spirit surfacing in his eyes. He had never heard of such a huge event happening in God's Domain before. Moreover, with God's Domain's current popularity, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the world's biggest competition. If he could stand out in this competition, he would definitely rise to prominence. Currently, the various major corporations were offering unprecedented prices to recruit experts in God's Domain. In fact, the top 50 experts on the God's Domain's experts list made even more money than A-list celebrities. We want to join, but the entry threshold is just too high. Even first-rate guilds aren't qualified. The Tier 3 man smiled bitterly. Nowadays, the various powers of God's Domain were all talking about the reserve seat competition. Even NPCs were discussing it. The competition's influence was unprecedented. In such a major competition, let alone securing one of the reserve seats, just being able to participate would already serve as proof of a guild's strength. In that case, is everyone here to participate in the competition today? The rookie shield warrior asked. The cloaked people are most likely participants. As for everyone else, they should be here to spectate, the Tier 3 man explained. Spectate? Can we go watch as well? The rookie asked eagerly. I'm afraid that's not possible, the Tier 3 man replied with some embarrassment. The entry fee alone is 300 gold, while the VIP rooms cost 5,000 gold and 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Moreover, there are only 1,000 VIP rooms available. 300 gold was a huge sum, even for current Tier 3 players. In fact, most Tier 3 players didn't have 300 gold in their pockets. After all, with how high a Tier 3 player's daily expenses were, saving a lot of money was simply impossible. As for the VIP rooms, they were for the exclusive use of large guilds. Individuals simply couldn't afford them. The 5,000 gold aside, just the 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal was already more than enough to distress first-rate guilds. What more second- and third-rate guilds? At this moment, the Tier 3 man wasn't the only person feeling embarrassed over this situation. Most of the other Tier 3 experts on the street also sighed. Spectating such a major competition would most likely yield a lot of benefits. I know, right? I heard that nearly 30 superpowers would participate in the competition, nearly 1/3 of them super guilds. Moreover, these superpowers are all sending their best. This is going to be the battle of a lifetime. I heard that too. Right now, everyone's going crazy over the VIP rooms. Some second- and third-rate guilds are even offering to pay double the price to get a room. Upon overhearing the discussions of other players on the street, the players who couldn't afford an entrance ticket yearned for one. God's Domain's various superpowers rarely waged war. They generally only fought in small skirmishes. However, the superpowers were now going all out. One could easily imagine how intense the competition would be. Meanwhile, such a major competition was held only once a year. Flame Dragon City, War God's Temple. At this time, the various superpowers members had already thronged the majestic headquarters of the Fire Dragon Empire's War God's Temple, numbering in the tens of thousands. Even the War God's Temple had no choice but to dispatch level 180 guards to maintain order. Meanwhile, on the top floor of a high-class restaurant near the War God's Temple, these superpowers are really being careful. Every one of their participating members has hidden their statistics and strength with black cloaks, Mu Lingxia said, her lips curled in disappointment as she looked at the crowd outside. That's normal. This competition is going to determine which superpower will hold hegemonic rights over God's domain. It is only natural for them to try to hide as much information as possible. Anyone who exposes their cards now will only make easy targets of themselves. Unyielding Heart, who sat beside Mu Lingxia, said, chuckling. However, I didn't expect for so many superpowers to apply for the competition in the Fire Dragon Empire. Although there are many empires in God's domain, only 4 of them are ancient nations. Any confident superpower wouldn't let go of these 4 nations. While guilds can register for the competition at any empire's capital, the guild that wins a reserve seat in their registered empire will receive additional benefits from the empire. Sighing, Mu Lingxia continued, it's a pity Unyielding Soul lacks accumulations. Otherwise, we could have come here to try our luck too. I wonder who will secure the 6 reserve seats? When Unyielding Heart spoke of the reserve seats, a hint of yearning appeared in his eyes. We can probably already determine who will get 5 out of the 6 seats. The last is the important one. I'm afraid those guilds are going to have a bloody battle, Mu Lingxia said gloatingly. The competition for the reserve seats was most likely going to be extremely intense. After all, if nothing unexpected happened, 5 of the 6 available seats would go to the 5 great super guilds. This left the other superpowers to compete over just 1 seat. The mere thought of the competition's intensity scared her. Mythology's people are here, Mu Lingxia said as she looked at a group of undisguised players walking down the distant street. At the head of this team was none other than Cold Shadow. Mythology's arrival instantly cast a grim shadow over the plaza in front of the War God's Temple. Setting aside the fact that Mythology was one of the virtual gaming industry's publicly acknowledged 5 great super guilds, just the fact that Mythology's members were doing nothing to hide their strength already proved how confident Mythology was in its strength. Although this team from Mythology wasn't the main force that would participate in the competition, even the weakest in the team of several hundred was a level 116, tier 3 player. Moreover, the base equipment standard of these people was level 115 fine gold set equipment. So, this is Mythology's strength? As expected of one of the 5 great super guilds. Even the team they sent to register is already so powerful. I really wonder how strong Mythology's representative team on the Western continent is. The spectators from the various superpowers and large guilds couldn't help growing fearful when they looked at Mythology's team. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, as Mythology's members submitted their registration to the War God's Temple, a round of exclamations suddenly rose from the plaza's edge. After Mythology's team, another team of players actually arrived uncloaked. Moreover, this team only had a little over a dozen players in it. Are they insane? Mu Lingxia froze in the middle of sipping her black tea when she saw this small team. After all, this team belonged to none other than the currently famous Zero Wing. Chapter 2705. We have our way, they are as bold as ever. Cold Shadow, who was registering Mythology for the competition before the War God's Temple, was slightly surprised to see Feng and the others among the crowd. They're tired of living. A nearly 3-meter-tall, heavily armored man standing beside Cold Shadow said disdainfully. Previously, they rejected your kindness and missed out on a great opportunity. Now, they actually dare take part in this event, even exposing their own data. They shouldn't think of getting through the foreign aid selection at this rate. The various superpowers had all recruited foreign aid for this competition. However, due to the rules, They could recruit only 100 outside helpers at most. Moreover, each helper cost 30 units of 7 luminaries crystal to register a huge burden on the various superpowers' finances. To make matters worse, recruiting foreign aid was one thing. Whether the recruited foreign aid could pass the preliminary selection and earn points for the guild they supported was another thing altogether. If the recruited foreign aid didn't pass the preliminary selection, then all the 7 luminaries crystals spent would go down the drain. Due to these reasons, the various superpowers wouldn't let go of even the slightest chance to defeat their opponents, let alone give away advantageous information to their opponents. With the classes in God's domain countering each other, even peak experts would have trouble when going up against opponents that countered their class. In a situation where one side thoroughly understood their opponent's basic attributes and equipment, that side could accurately arrange the appropriate manpower to suppress their opponents. Now that Zero Wing had leaked all this information, its members would be hard-pressed not to get targeted. What is that black flame thinking? Did nobody tell them that this operation requires concealment? The eyes of a group of cloaked players standing at the edge of the plaza nearly fell out of their sockets when Zero Wing's members came into sight. The competition for the 12 Great Guilds reserve seats was an event of utmost importance. The various superpowers had spent a lot of effort just to hide their strength. Some superpowers had even purchased camouflage items for some of their ace members for fear that these members would get perfectly countered. However, Zero Wing had done none of that and boldly displayed its information to the various superpowers. Hong Xinyuan, are these the trump cards you spent 3 reserve slots to recruit? You've truly opened this old man's eyes. An elderly man with graying hair said as he looked at Hong Xinyuan standing beside him. The wrath in his voice made even Mushin and the other Vice Guild leaders nearby shudder. Great Elder Blue, this should be an accident, Mushin hurriedly explained to the blue-robed old man named Brilliant Blue. Brilliant Blue was one of Frost Heaven's 5 frost pillars. Previously, Brilliant Blue had nearly flipped over Frost Heaven because of Hong Xinyuan's decision to give away 3 upper zone reserve slots to Zero Wing. In the past, the Boulder Corporation had rejected Brilliant Blue's request for a reserve slot for his grandson. However, he had eventually dropped the matter. After all, the reserve slots were extremely precious, and the Green God Company wouldn't necessarily gift the Boulder Corporation with slots every year. Now, however, Hong Xinyuan had decided to give away 3 of these precious slots to a bunch of outsiders without even consulting with anyone. There was no way Brilliant Blue wouldn't get angry over this matter, especially with Zero Wing having made such a huge blunder now. An accident? Brilliant Blue laughed when he heard this. That's right. This is indeed an accident. An accident on a scale this old man has never seen before. Lon having no excuses for this situation, Hong Xinyuan said apologetically, some problems have indeed occurred this time, but Zero Wing's members are undoubtedly strong. They are indeed pretty good. Of the 17 of them, even the lowest leveled person is level 117, while the highest has even reached level 121. Each of them also has 6 pieces of epic equipment on average. This is a rare sight even among the various superpowers' main force teams, Brilliant Blue said. He then turned to the other elders present and continued, however, they have exposed all their data now. It will be child's play for the other superpowers to counter them. Frost Heaven's 7 luminaries crystals aren't easy to come by. Every piece is exchanged using the guild members' blood and sweat. I don't want to see those crystals wasted. I suggest removing Zero Wing now and having my grandson's subordinates fill up the remaining slots. When Brilliant Blue finished speaking, the guild elders present fell silent for a while. I think what Great Elder Blue said is logical. Now that Zero Wing has made such a blunder, we do need to replace them, one of the Vice Guild leaders standing behind Brilliant Blue said and nodded. Blue's words aren't unreasonable. I also think that it is necessary to replace them, a white-haired Grand Elder said. The dispute over the reserve seats will greatly impact God's domain's future. It might even determine Frost Heaven's life and death. We cannot afford to be sloppy in this matter. We don't have to take such a risk either. That's right. There is indeed no need for us to take this risk. After the white-haired Grand Elder spoke up, The other guild elders present also started voicing their agreement with Brilliant Blue's suggestion. As for the matter of finding new foreign aid to replace Zero Wing's members, nobody present was concerned about that. The various superpowers had prepared plenty of substitutes for today's event. Naturally, Frost Heaven wasn't an exception. Not to mention, Brilliant Blue's grandson wasn't some simpleton either. In fact, he had gained the title of Sloth in the Flower of Seven Sins. If not for his having joined the Flower of Seven Sins, he would have already become a vice-guild leader in Frost Heaven. Meanwhile, the Flower of Seven Sins was an organization proficient at assassination. Its members were natural killers. There was no superpower more adept at dealing with players than the Flower of Seven Sins, not even super guilds. Brilliant Blue's grandson was one of Frost Heaven's trump cards in this competition. Having the Flower of Seven Sins' peak experts replace Zero Wing's members wouldn't be a problem at all. Of course, Brilliant Blue's selfishness also played a role in his decision. The 3 reserve slots Hong Xinyuan offered to Zero Wing were actually his personal property. They didn't belong to the guild or the Boulder Corporation. Brilliant Blue couldn't force Hong Xinyuan to give them to him. However, if Zero Wing got removed and Brilliant Blue's grandson helped Frost Heaven secure a reserve seat, Hong Xinyuan would have to give those 3 upper zone reserve slots to Brilliant Blue's grandson to preserve his reputation. Just as the various elders present were about to reach a consensus, someone interrupted them. "Dear elders, don't you think you're going a little too far?" Mushin said. "Mushin, where do you think we've gone too far? Do you find my words unreasonable?" Brilliant Blue asked in dissatisfaction. "What you said indeed makes sense, Great Elder Blue." Mushin nodded. However, Uncle Hong contributed nearly half of the 7 luminaries crystals we used to recruit foreign aid this time. If not for his contribution, Frost Heaven would have had difficulty collecting so many crystals. Now, Uncle Hong is only taking 17 slots for his own use, yet you are arbitrarily deciding to replace Zero Wing already. Isn't that a bit much? At least let Uncle Hong decide this matter himself. At Mushin's words, the grand elders and elders present fell silent. What Mushin said was the truth. Without the 7 luminaries crystals Hong Xinyuan contributed, they really wouldn't have been able to register so many outside helpers for the competition. Now, Hong Xinyuan wasn't even using 1/5 of the total slots. They indeed didn't have the right to reject or help Hong Xinyuan decide. What you say is correct, but we are also doing this in consideration of the guild's future, Brilliant Blue said righteously. Old Hong, didn't you contribute those crystals for the sake of the guild as well? Just when Brilliant Blue wanted to say something more, a dignified, middle-aged man in the team suddenly spoke up. "Stop arguing. Do you plan to make fools of yourselves in front of the other superpowers?" As soon as this middle-aged man spoke up, everyone present fell silent. Respect also appeared in everyone's eyes as they looked at this man. However, Brilliant Blue still refused to budge. "Guild leader, we cannot afford to be careless in this matter. Others might be afraid of 7 Wonders, the guild leader of Frost Heaven, but not Brilliant Blue. Not only was Brilliant Blue one of the 5 Frost Pillars, but he was also 1 generation older than 7 Wonders. Hence, 7 Wonders still had to take his words seriously. Enough! 7 Wonders frowned. This matter ends here. We will not remove Zero Wing. However, what Great Elder Blue said is reasonable as well. Notify Zero Wing that we won't help them during the preliminary selection. This is their problem, so they have to solve it themselves. Frost Heaven does not have any excess combat power to spare." "Guild leader." Mushin was startled. She never thought that 7 Wonders would make such a decision. This was equivalent to abandoning Zero Wing. Hong Xinyuan also frowned at this decision. Without Frost Heaven's assistance, Zero Wing would most likely have difficulty getting through the preliminaries. And even if Zero Wing passed, not many of them should remain. Enough. Get it done. 7 Wonders said resolutely. Understood, Mushin sighed. Mushin was powerless to change 7 Wonders' decision. She immediately relayed the news to Shifeng. As for how far Zero Wing could reach, That would depend entirely on Zero Wing itself. Guild leader, Frost Heaven is having us fend for ourselves, Yan Tianxing said, startled by the message Shi Feng shared with the team. Yan Tianxing had advised Shi Feng to conceal their information. However, Shi Feng had rejected his suggestion. Now look what happened? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What do you guys think? Shi Feng asked Fire Dance and the others, chuckling. Let them. We have our way of doing things. Why should we play by their rules? Fire Dance said nonchalantly. Big Sis Fire is right. I've also been itching for a good fight lately, Violet Cloud said, a hint of excitement flashing in her eyes. Similarly, Cola and the others also expressed their eagerness for a good fight. Since that's the case, let's go get registered. Chapter 2706, Selection Battle inside a high-class bar near the War God's Temple's plaza. A feminine man in a light gray cloak appeared silently beside a handsome young man drinking red wine inside the bar. As if the feminine man did not exist, none of the bar's other occupants noticed his arrival. Young master, it'll be difficult to get those reserve slots. Seven Wonders did not remove Zero Wing. He only decided to let Zero Wing fend for itself, the feminine man whispered. Zero Wing's members have registered already. Now, all they have to do is wait 3 hours for the preliminary selection to begin. Zero Wing sure is lucky not to get removed even after making such a blunder. The handsome young man named Sorrowful Heaven frowned slightly, then said coldly, however, Zero Wing shouldn't even think of getting its hands on even one of those reserve slots. Sorrow, how about I attack them directly afterward? A girl with disheveled hair sitting beside Sorrowful Heaven suggested, excitement sparkling in her eyes. The woman had the flower of Seven Sins' symbol imprinted on her arm. As soon as this small and delicate girl spoke up, everyone inside the bar shook visibly as they reluctantly recalled a scene in the past. Hayes, you have to abide by the rules this time. Otherwise, I won't bring you out anymore, Sorrowful Heaven said. A hint of fear had also surfaced in his eyes when he looked at this harmless-looking girl. Even after becoming one of the 7 sins, Sorrowful Heaven still dared not act carelessly around this girl. After all, death was the best relief when one went against this harmless girl. Even the flower of 7 sins' mysterious leader got a headache when dealing with her. If they did not manage her properly, she would easily trigger a catastrophe. Don't worry. I'll definitely listen to you during this mission. I won't recklessly do anything to those people. The girl named Imperial Haze nodded obediently and giggled. That's good. Sorrowful Heaven breathed out a sigh of relief. He then said slowly, we don't have to worry about Zero Wing this time. Now that Zero Wing has exposed all its data, the other superpowers' foreign aid will target them first. We won't have to do anything to Zero Wing. On the contrary, while everyone else is focused on Zero Wing, we can search for the War God orders. The selection match for foreign aid was straightforward. All registered foreign aid would be teleported to a special space to search for the War God orders scattered there. They would have 5 hours to do so, and once the time was up, all participants holding a War God order would pass the selection. However, the number of War God orders was limited to 100. In other words, only 100 players, at most, could pass the selection. Compared to the number of foreign aid the various superpowers had recruited, the number of available slots was pitifully small. According to the information they obtained, 6 super first-rate guilds and 3 super guilds had come to the Fire Dragon Empire to register for the competition. This meant that 900 players would participate in the preliminary selection, and only 1/9 of these participants could officially become foreign aid. Everyone else would just be wasting their 7 luminaries crystals. Meanwhile, Zero Wing only had 17 members participating in the selection. Trying to secure War God orders while going up against so many experts was simply a fool's dream. As Sorrowful Heaven was considering how he could capitalize on Zero Wing's predicament, Cold Shadow was resting inside one of the War God's temple's lounges. When she received news of Zero Wing's situation, she revealed a satisfied smile. Vice Guild Leader, did you receive good news? The female guardian knight Whitefeather asked in surprise. Yes. Cold Shadow replied. Although I don't know which dumb guild it was that invited Zero Wing is dead for sure this time. None of Zero Wing's members should even dream of passing the selection. Vice Guild Leader, Zero Wing's 17 members possess extraordinary strength. While not all of them can pass, there is still a chance that 2 or 3 of them will succeed, Whitefeather said, shaking her head in disagreement. It might have been possible before, but I'm afraid it's not anymore, Cold Shadow said in a playful tone. According to our spies, the Sky Dragon House and Pride Empire have come forward to work with Demon Palace and Miracle to annihilate Zero Wing. How is this possible? This revelation stunned Whitefeather. The competition for the 6 reserve seats was incredibly intense, and every participating power was treating the others as mortal enemies. 2 superpowers working together was already unbelievable. Now, 4 superpowers had actually banded together to target Zero Wing. What exactly had Zero Wing done to anger all these guilds? Nothing's impossible. Chuckling, Cold Shadow said, Did you forget whom Zero Wing offended before? Is this Saint's Hand's doing? Whitefeather immediately thought of the incomparably mysterious Saint's Hand. That's right. Saint's Hand promised the 4 guilds something, and the 4 guilds agreed without hesitation. Cold Shadow nodded. Smiling, she continued, I doubt even Zero Wing would have expected that this preliminary selection would turn into their execution. Zero Wing is truly finished this time. Whitefeather sighed at the situation. Nearly half of the 900 players entering the battlefield were going to target Zero Wing. None of Zero Wing's members should even think of leaving the battlefield alive. After all, the preliminary selections battlefield was a special space that prohibited players from using berserk skills and tools and increased the consumption of stamina and concentration by tenfold. Such rules would greatly restrict the participants' combat power. Even powerful players would have difficulty fighting for a long time and would be vulnerable to Zerg tactics. Meanwhile, players who died within that special space would not only lose 5 levels but also be prevented from logging into the game for 5 natural days. This was the price for participating in the competition for the 12 Great Guilds reserve seats. Zero Wing had mobilized all its top combatants for the competition this time. If Zero Wing team wiped, the guild would undoubtedly suffer a devastating blow. Following which, time passed quickly. Amid the various superpowers' anticipation, the 9 foreign aid teams arrived inside the War God's Temple's selection hall. A total of 900 players stood on all sides of the hall. Some groups were large, while others were small. However, aside from Zero Wing's members, everyone else present had concealed their information using black cloaks. Are they the targets? What a pitiful bunch. They probably don't know that our 4 forces have joined hands already. Once the competition begins, we'll attack them together. I wonder if they'll get scared silly at that time? How unfortunate. I wanted to challenge that black flame to check the results of my recent training. Now this chance is gone. The helpers of the Sky Dragon family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace, and Miracle conversed with each other through the team chat, their words filled with ridicule and sympathy for Shifeng's group. Sorrow, those teams are acting strangely. Every one of them is actually staring at Zero Wing's members, Imperial Haze stated as she looked at the 4 superpowers members. That's not surprising. Who asked Zero Wing's members to be so courageous? Sorrowful Heaven retorted nonchalantly. If I weren't afraid of Hong Xinyuan holding me accountable and refusing to give me those reserve slots afterward, I would send Zero Wing's members on their way even if the other superpowers didn't target them. Is that so? Imperial Haze still couldn't help growing uncertain as she looked at the 4 superpowers' foreign aid teams. By the way, we'll first pretend to move together with Zero Wing afterward. However, so long as we come across other teams during the operation, we'll immediately split away from Zero Wing and let Zero Wing's members tie down the enemy. Remember, you better not take action, Sorrowful Heaven said sternly. I understand. Imperial Haze nodded. Shortly after Sorrowful Heaven finished speaking, everyone in the hall felt their vision blur momentarily. When they recovered, they discovered that they had already arrived inside a forested valley. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After scanning his surroundings, Sorrowful Heaven found that the various teams were situated relatively close to each other. If they abandoned Zero Wing too soon, they would most likely get caught by a different team during their retreat. "We'll move together with Zero Wing first," Sorrowful Heaven said through the team chat. However, even after Sorrowful Heaven gave this command, none of the Flower of Seven Sins' members moved. Instead, they all stood still, looking dumbfounded. This was because nearly half of the foreign aid teams present had started dashing in their direction like a bunch of madmen as Sorrowful Heaven issued his command. "What's going on?" Sorrowful Heaven was similarly stunned as he looked at the several hundred players charging at his team from all directions. Chapter 2707, Fire Dragon's 6 Absolutes. Upon seeing 400 people acting in unison, let alone Sorrowful Heaven, even the other foreign aid teams in the distance were dumbfounded by this situation. Are these people crazy? Zero Wing has only exposed some weaknesses that can be exploited. Do these people really need to behave like this? What kind of guild is Zero Wing? Did it desecrate these people's ancestral graves? In the preliminary selection, it wasn't far-fetched to say that aside from the members of one's team, everyone else was an enemy. There did not exist any possibility for cooperation. Yet, 4 teams were now working together to annihilate Zero Wing's members. Moreover, these teams had perfect coordination with each other. Nobody would believe it if someone said there was no hatred between Zero Wing and these teams. Boss Sorrow, these people should be aiming at Zero Wing. A level 117, Tier 3 ranger from the Flower of Seven Sins reported to Sorrowful Heaven. When he observed the movements and goal of these 4 teams, he gulped nervously despite himself. What exactly did Zero Wing do to make 4 superpowers take such drastic action? At this moment, Sorrowful Heaven couldn't help staring at Shifeng's group in shock. Based on the 4 teams' coordinated movements, it was clear they had discussed things beforehand. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone all out to annihilate Zero Wing's members as soon as the selection began. Zero Wing was merely an up-and-coming pseudo-superpower, yet it had actually provoked 4 superpowers into working together to deal with it. This was definitely a first in God's domain. If word of this situation spread, Zero Wing would instantly become famous throughout God's domain. "Boss, what should we do?" the Tier 3 ranger asked. "Let's wait and see first before making a decision," Sorrowful Heaven commanded calmly and quickly. Based on the 4 teams' killing intent, he could tell that they weren't targeting the Flower of Seven Sins. Even so, he still had to be careful. After all, every one of these foreign aid teams had famous experts in them, and even the weakest of their members was a Flowing Water Realm expert. Many of them were even Void Realm experts, an existence that even the guild leaders of first-rate guilds had to tread carefully around. The 4 teams' coordinated charge was equivalent to 400 guild leaders or vice-guild leaders of first-rate guilds charging together. Just the thought of it made Sorrowful Heaven's scalp prickle. Less than 10 seconds later, several dozen figures dashed past the Flower of Seven Sins members, their passage scattering the surrounding flowers and grass. Meanwhile, the moment these people passed by, everyone from the Flower of Seven Sins, with the exception of Imperial Haze, felt a sense of relief. The pressure they gave off is too frightening. "I think over 80% of these people are Void Realm experts," a level 117, Tier 3 assassin exclaimed as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. The other Flower of Seven Sins members also nodded in agreement with this Tier 3 assassin's assessment. Although it was indeed true that even their weakest members were at the Flowing Water Realm, there were only 5 Void Realm experts on their team. While Sorrowful Heaven was a Domain Realm expert, in this special space, he would have difficulty going up against 3 Void Realm experts simultaneously. He might even get killed. In other words, if they excluded the monstrous Imperial Haze, the overall strength of the several dozen players that had just passed by was still above them. Meanwhile, this was only a small portion of the strength 4 foreign aid teams commanded. You think the strongest among these people are only at the Void Realm? After calming himself, Sorrowful Heaven couldn't help rolling his eyes at his subordinates. Boss Sorrow, are you saying there are peerless experts hidden among these people? Everyone gasped reflexively when they heard Sorrowful Heaven's words. Peerless experts. They were existences even super guilds had to be wary of, the important mainstays of the various superpowers. Otherwise, do you think those superpowers would spend so many 7 luminaries crystals to recruit foreign aid? Glancing at the afterimage left behind by a muscular old man, Sorrowful Heaven took a deep breath and said, I suspect that old man who rushed past us just now is 3 Autumns, one of the Grand Elders that founded the Fire Dragon Adventurer Alliance. 3 Autumns? The person known as Sky Shaker? The Flower of 7 Sins members shuddered at this name. According to the rumors, 3 Autumns was a phenomenal existence. Relying on his incredible ghost hammer technique, he had not only defeated several apex experts from the Sky Dragon family but also fought one of the Super Guild's dragon heads to a standstill. After that feat, 3 Autumns had gained the title of Sky Shaker in the Fire Dragon Empire. This, in turn, allowed the newly emerged and loosely organized Fire Dragon Adventurer Alliance to get a foothold in the Fire Dragon Empire. 3 Autumns should be the trump card of one of the foreign aid teams. The other teams should have their own peerless experts as well. As Sorrowful Heaven watched the 4 teams close in on Shifeng's group, an indescribable sense of shock filled him. These 4 superpowers really think highly of Zero Wing. Although the Flower of 7 Sins team had Imperial Haze as a trump card, if it had to go up against 4 peerless experts simultaneously, only death awaited its members. Aside from Imperial Haze, everyone else wouldn't have any chance to survive. Just what kind of ability did Zero Wing possess to warrant such a frightening lineup? While Sorrowful Heaven was feeling stunned, the 4 foreign aid teams had arrived before Zero Wing's members. A total of 400 powerful experts were directing their killing intent at Shifeng and his companions. The killing intent radiated by any one of these experts was more than enough to turn ordinary players pale. Now that all 400 of these people were releasing their killing intent simultaneously, the space around Shifeng's group even started to darken. In fact, even from over 1,000 yards away, the Flower of 7 Sins' members still felt a chill crawl down their backs, and they felt an urge to flee. Young man, don't blame us for bullying you with numbers. If you have to blame someone, blame yourself for behaving too arrogantly and offending people you shouldn't offend. 3 Autumns said, sighing as he looked at Shifeng. What's the point of talking to them? The sooner we get rid of them, the sooner we can get down to business. The one-eyed, young male guardian knight standing beside 3 Autumns said. Red Rain, don't say that. At least let them die knowingly. That way, they can have a smoother path ahead of them. A beautiful woman with long elven ears and a graceful figure chided with a smile. Black Flame, I originally wanted to have a fair fight with you, but work comes first for me. Don't blame me for prioritizing victory over fairness. A white-haired youth wielding a great sword declared as he walked out of the crowd. When these 4 people appeared, the crowd spectating in the distance couldn't help gaping and gasping in shock. Sky Shaker, Red Rain, Elven Enchantress, and Mad Sword. Why are all these people here? At this moment, let alone the Flowing Water Realm experts, even a Domain Realm expert like Sorrowful Heaven spontaneously broke out in a cold sweat. He never thought that his guess was actually on the mark. 4 of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes had actually gathered here. If these 4 people worked together, they could move unhindered in the Fire Dragon Empire. Even the Empire's super guilds wouldn't dare to offend them casually. Guild leader, these 4 people aren't ordinary opponents. It'll be risky for us to clash with them, Yan Tianxing warned as he looked at the 4 smiling people. The fame of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes resounded even in the distant Star Moon Kingdom. This was because every one of these 6 absolutes had gained their fame through their astonishing battle records. They were different from experts whose reputations were due to the bragging of guilds. It seems even the heavens want Zero Wing dead this time. Sorrowful Heaven couldn't help but lament over this situation. However, despite his feelings over the matter, he still eagerly hoped for Zero Wing's demise. Otherwise, the upper zone would forever be beyond his reach. Black Flame, now that you're aware of the situation, if you want to hate someone, hate yourself for being too arrogant. As soon as the level 119 Elven Enchantress said this, she retrieved the bow slung on her back and shot an arrow at Shifeng. Tier 3 skill, Sky Piercer. The next moment, a blue flash punctured a hole through space and crossed the 60-yard distance in the blink of an eye. The arrow's speed was so fast that even Sorrowful Heaven and the other spectators failed to react to it immediately. Moreover, the arrow carried so much power that the punctured space continued cracking even after the arrow had passed. I just didn't see you for a while, and your arrow's speed has actually become faster? I could barely perceive it at this close distance, Red Rain said as he looked at Elven Enchantress. Isn't it better to let him die without pain? Elven Enchantress smiled faintly as she put her longbow away. Elven Enchantress's gentle smile awoke a sense of dread in the other three absolutes present. None of them objected to her words, though. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If Elven Enchantress launched her arrow within 100 yards, even Tier 3 assassins would fall without knowing what hit them. Not to mention, Shifeng was only a swordsman. However, as soon as Elven Enchantress finished speaking, a playful chuckle entered everyone's ears. Die? I'm afraid you're still not quite up to scratch for that. The next moment, a person actually walked out of the shattered space, and this person was even toying with the blue arrow Elven Enchantress shot out just now. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.